All right, folks, welcome. We'll go ahead and get this called to order at 9:01 a.m., and we're going to start right off the bat with item B, a moment of silence. Commissioner Pritchett?
Join us for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. May I have a motion as to the October 22nd, November 19th, 2019 minutes? All right, we have a motion from Commissioner Pritchett. I'll second it. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. All right, Commissioner Isnardi, Echo 1.
Okay. Bear with me a sec.
I saw Junie back there, so if we could have Junie come up as well, I'd appreciate that.
Okay, this is a resolution verifying Brevard County's continuing commitment and efforts to uphold and adhere the principles embodied in the Constitution of the United States of America. And the idea of this resolution is inspired by recent events, where we've all been witness to a surge in local governments that have been adopting resolutions declaring themselves as Second Amendment sanctuaries. While I am in full support of these efforts, as the Second Amendment is one of our most important protected rights, at least in my opinion, my concern is that by carving out portions of our Constitution, we could in fact weaken it and put them more at risk, whether it be for future restrictions or otherwise. This would not likely happen with this commission, of course, but may occur with future commissions. And I think it's a shame that because of the anti-gun movement and attempts at restricting the Second Amendment, that local governments feel that they have to pass Second Amendment sanctuary protections. These rights are already protected and guaranteed in our Constitution. No doubt, if certain lawmakers had their way, they would rewrite the whole document. This is not to take away from the changes brought forth by Commissioner Tobias, for example, on immigration, and especially the rule changes where Brevard County employees can now carry while at work, exercising their Second Amendment right. I'm proud to be a part of a commission that recognizes that an employee's Second Amendment rights don't stop because they're at work. I think this commission has done an excellent job in following the U.S. Constitution, and this resolution, if passed, will demonstrate to our residents that we commit never to waver from this important responsibility, that we support the Constitution in its entirety. I asked our Sheriff, Wayne Ivey, to come in today to accept this resolution, as I believe our Sheriff demonstrates by his actions every single day that he is not only a true patriot, but a firm believer of our Constitution. And I'll also be presenting this resolution to Bob White, as he's the chairman of the Republican Liberty Caucus of Florida and a supporter of this resolution, and he is a fierce defender of our Constitution. He wanted to be here as well, but he is currently in Tallahassee as we speak, fighting a gun control bill. So I'll read the resolution, and if Sheriff Ivey, if you'll say a few words. Yes, ma'am. Okay. A resolution of the Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, verifying its continuing commitment and efforts to uphold and adhere to the principles embodied in the Constitution of the United States of America. Whereas the Constitution of the United States is the cornerstone of our government and represents American values, and whereas the first President of the United States and all subsequent presidents have sworn, as required by Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution, to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and whereas local elected officials also swear to uphold the Constitution upon entering office and must understand that the Constitution is a standard against which all laws, policies, and interpretations should be measured. And whereas the Brevard County Board of County Commissioners strongly believes that all provisions of the Constitution must be upheld without exception, not just sections popular with certain groups in certain times of history. And whereas in recent years, the Board of County Commissioners has adopted resolutions to ensure the county follows all federal law regarding immigration and to guarantee no action is taken to cause Brevard County to become a sanctuary county. And whereas the Board of County Commissioners has recognized the right to bear arms by allowing employees to carry concealed weapons while at work in appropriate circumstances. And whereas the Brevard County Board of County Commissioners will not waver when it comes to preserving and protecting all the rights provided to the American people in the Constitution and Bill of Rights at all times. Now therefore be it resolved by the Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, done, ordered, and adopted in regular session this what date is it? January 21st, 2020. And with that, I'll make a motion to approve this resolution.
And I'll go ahead and second it. So with that, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Junie and Sheriff, you have the floor.
And just before you speak, I want to thank Ms. Bentley. She brought us all pocket constitutions, which I think is great. I have one, but mine's, I've had it for a lot of years, so I appreciate it, Ms. Bentley, and I appreciate the commission in supporting it. And if you guys desire, I had them framed for your offices. Maybe, not so much for you guys, because I don't worry about you guys following the laws of the Constitution, but maybe for your predecessor, Okay.
Thanks.
First of all, thank you for allowing me to be here this morning, and certainly, Commissioner Nardi, thank you for bringing forth this resolution. As you said, I think you hit the nail on the head. The Constitution is the strongest fabric of our country, and when we start cutting out pieces of it and piecemealing, I think it weakens the Constitution. So this resolution stands that the citizens of Brevard County are well protected by the Constitution. And we're not doing anything but telling everyone that our Constitution is the law of our land and we're going to stand strong with it. And I'm honored to be here today because I believe that our law enforcement officers are the first line of defense for our citizens and their rights and their guarantees. So to see you bring this resolution forward not only means a lot to our community, but it means a lot to our law enforcement officers as well. And you see what's happening across the country where certain aspects of our Constitution are under attack. And I think we have to keep it all together. It is one document. It is the strongest document we could ever have, and it, quite frankly, is the reason people want to come be part of our country. So I applaud you for bringing this forward.
Thank you for your help with this.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. If you don't mind, I'm going to ask some of my team to come down. You guys, come on now. Andy. Only bring the good looking ones.
Sheriff, you better step out of the way then.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, we're going to move right along to the consent agenda. Would anyone like to see something pulled? All right, no one wants something pulled. May I have a motion?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
sorry. May I pull F10?
F10. All right, may I have a motion to approve consent less F10? All right, Commissioner Pritchett made the motion. I'll second it. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, consent less F10's passed. Commissioner Tobias, F10.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is concerning board appointments. I think I'd asked for a couple of them to be pulled upon review. My office spent a little time and dug through some of the legal proceedings and found out that the appointee to the Historical Commission was voluntarily dismissed without any findings by a judge or law enforcement, so there's no issues on that one. However, Commissioner Smith's appointee to P&Z still leaves me with some deep concern. There's an accusation of domestic violence against women. I take this extremely seriously, and I'm not prepared to vote for someone who's had a finding related to that without detailed information about the circumstances. So, Commissioner Smith, is there any additional information regarding the circumstances of this individual's history before I go ahead and vote?
Well, the circumstances on this are very similar to the one you just said is okay. It was involving a domestic dispute. The charges were dismissed 2 weeks later. When couples get divorced, they start throwing accusations at each other to make the other one look bad, and that's exactly what happened in this case, as did the other case you were just speaking of.
Thank you, Commissioner Smith, but your understanding of court documents and mine are completely different. Of the individual you spoke with has an injunction issued against them based on evidence presented to the court while the other was voluntarily dismissed. Under Florida law, for an injunction to be issued, a judge must found that, quote, it appears that the court that the practitioner is either the victim of domestic violence or has reasonable cause to believe that he or she is in imminent danger of becoming a victim of domestic violence. The evidence to support this injunction must be, quote, strong and clear. So the accusation or the statement you just said is patently false. They are dissimilar.
Let me jump in here, and I'll take my commissioner hat off, or at least put it to the side and throw the attorney hat on for a moment. The burden of proof, and I'm not saying that this should cause folks to vote one way or the other, but just to be clear, the burden of proof for getting an injunction issued is far lower than it is in a criminal case. I'm not saying that there aren't concerns or that there may not be valid concerns with respect to someone having an injunction issued against them. However, that's a far cry from saying that they were convicted or even received a withhold of adjudication on a criminal charge. I think that everyone's entitled to a degree of due process, certainly an appropriate degree of due process, as we just went through our constitutional item a few moments ago. And as such, since we're not dealing with something that's criminal in nature, I'm going to go ahead, based upon Commissioner Smith's comments with respect to his being satisfied with this appointee and his understanding of how the criminal case was disposed of. I'm going to go ahead and support that, but certainly folks are entitled to vote as they will. Commissioner Tobias, is that an old light or a new one?
Yes, one quick question. I couldn't find any record of the injunction being lifted. Do you have, I think that probably would be an indication that...
No, I don't. I called the gentleman involved, and he told me that the circumstances were as I discussed them. I didn't go any deeper than that because I know that there hasn't been any adjudication. He hasn't been found guilty of anything. If he is, I'll be happy to withdraw his name. But at this point, it's just an accusation.
It, unfortunately, according to state statute, is quite a bit different, and for that reason and the fact that I take domestic abuse extremely seriously, and this, the standard innocent until proven guilty is one thing in a criminal court, but this is not that. And O.J. Simpson was not found guilty, but I wouldn't be appointing him to any of my boards. So for that reason, I cannot vote to support your nominee, or this nominee.
And I'll just add very briefly, at the risk of being a little circular, just to reiterate the fact that I do take it just as seriously as Commissioner Tabaya, the aspect of domestic violence. I have done more pro bono work for Brevard County Legal Aid, specifically defending, representing petitioners in the domestic violence injunction venue than I probably have for any other agency, including the animal causes that I've represented. I've done quite a bit of work for them as well. So it's not to say that I don't take domestic violence seriously, but I take our constitutional protections and our entitlement to due process even more seriously than I do, quite frankly, anything else, whether it's due process, whether it's right to bear arms, whether it's freedom of speech. So for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and support it. But I think we've all kind of hashed out where we're going to be on it. So unless there's something new, I'm going to go ahead and call the question once we have a motion as to F10.
I'd like to make a motion to deny Commissioner Tabaya's accusations
And approve F10?
and approve F10.
Was that a light or?
I'm just putting out so you can hear my vote.
Oh, okay. All right. I'll go ahead and second it. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
All right. Passes 4-1 with Commissioner Tabaya and then negative. So moving right along to public comments, item G is in golf. Mr. Tovey.
Charles Tovey, 2555 Roberts Road, Melbourne. I want to thank Commissioner Tabaya for his work on the CRAs, and had he not done that, we'd probably be still dealing with CRAs. And thank you, Commissioner Smith, for your help in that matter as well. And I've started work on the North Lagoon. By the end of spring, I should have it all straightened out. And regardless of everybody else's employment on the lagoon and its recovery, I still say that my work is the most impactful to the recovery of the lagoon. And I will disclose it after I finish the north part, and I'll reveal all my secrets. I have my speaker card was on code enforcement, and it was about my property. I think it was 2005. I got a FEMA trailer, and then Palm Shores called code enforcement on my FEMA trailer first. I want to know if there's anybody else that's had code enforcement call on a FEMA trailer. And for another, if you got a FEMA trailer, then you had to have some kind of damage from the hurricanes, and it come along with code enforcement, and I had nothing to do with it. They come and they put the trailer on, I didn't want it, and they took it whenever. I had nothing to do with the FEMA trailer. And then it went to my tree, the biggest tree in Florida, I claim still. And because the tree being fallen from my neighbor excavating my property, and there's deputies not doing anything, and I asked them to get a no trespass, and they didn't, and still to this day, he's on destroying my property. From the tree, it went to my boat that they took inadvertently, and then I paid the fine for all of them, and I complied for all of them, and I never had a code enforcement complaint. My house wasn't collected of things until people destroy it, and they let them do it. I wouldn't have these problems if it hadn't been for other people. So from the boat, it went to the house. And after the house, they tried to burn me out of my house. After my house, it went to repeat violence. I don't even know the lady. She enforces it with the South Precinct and the rest of them. How is this, and I live outside my house for 10 years now since the arson, and you're collecting monies on me, and you took everything I have to make an employment and a life, and then expect me to pay fines and comply. Thank you for your time, and have a nice day.
Thank you, sir. And I was going to say, with respect to the code enforcement question, Mr. Denningoff, do you think Brian Locke would be a good person for him to reach out to find out whether or not there have been other similar complaints? I'm not sure if there might be someone better.
He certainly could start there if he wished. I think there's been contact there previously, but it wouldn't hurt to try again.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, last item on public comment, Sandra Sullivan from South Patrick Shores. Yes, ma'am.
Before my time starts, can I hand this out?
Sure. Thank you.
Happy New Year, first of all. Sandra Sullivan from South Patrick Shores. So a bit over a year ago, there was testing done for the PFAS, and in that testing, they, at my request, I'm very grateful, the county did some testing of some shallow wells. And on one of those 3 shallow wells, TCE, which is trichlorinated ethylene, was detected. I talked to a expert, a PhD, that was involved in it, if it was your child, in Franklin, Illinois, where they have a lot of cancer cases and other health issues. And he explained to me TCE is like a big chocolate cookie, and in areas you have high concentrations where those chocolate chips are, and in other areas like this level here might be in the dough. But TCE is a plume. Okay, now 2 of those sites that were tested are on the drainage channel coming down from Patrick Air Force Base, which was known, just like our disposal site, to have 55 gallons of oil, which was mixed with TCE back in those days. So if you look around the country, around Air Force bases, TCE is a very common contaminant. Now, in my yard, the EPA found, and they did some games with the testing, but they found dioxane in front of my bedroom along with chloroform and bromodichloromethylene. those are called surrogates or tracers. The dioxane and research I've done, in 96% of cases, they find that there is TCE. When they're doing TCE testing with VOCs, they have to do, by EPA's own rules, 58 samples, because as explained to me by this expert, you have non-detect, 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 and then a spike, and non-detect, 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 non-detect. So there is, I believe, two separate issues here. One is the disposal site, and then the other one is, where was this TCE location? Because who is the responsible party depends on where this was tested. Two of the sites were on the drainage channel. One of them is on the Corps of Engineers disposal area, and one of them is on neither. And that has to be disclosed to the DEP in order to know who is the responsible party to do the testing, whether it's the county, whether it's the Patrick Air Force Base, or whether it's the Corps of Engineers. So I am requesting that this data, which is being held by Applied Ecology, be released to DEP so that they can determine who the responsible party is. Thank you.
Now, Ms. Sullivan, do you know
Yeah.
if the county has that as well, or if that's something that hasn't yet been transmitted to us?
I don't know if the county has it or not. On the chain of custody document, it just lists an acronym for each of those locations. The county may not have that location, but Applied Ecology certainly could, and the county could direct Applied Ecology to release that to DEP, to Ashley Gardner.
Yeah, I'm just kind of glancing over at Virginia Barker here, shaking her head in the negative as to whether or not we have it. I'm certainly happy to give any of that information that we have, but let me give Ms. Barker a second to come up. Because if we can get it, I have no problem having that released. I doubt anyone here would.
Can I comment?
Let's give her an opportunity real quick first.
Thank you. So the issue is when this concern came up, we had just installed water quality monitoring wells throughout the county, and there were 3 in the north of Satellite Beach area. We went to those folks who had allowed us to put wells on their private property and explained that we would like to also test for these chemicals of emerging concern, potential contaminants from the military dump, but we would protect their identity by labeling the bottles in such a way that we could tell these were from the vicinity of South Patrick Shores, but we would not be able to tell which house was which.
I see.
So, no, there were 3 samples, and here were the data from the 3 samples in this general vicinity, but I do not know which sample came from which, and our consultant was specifically directed to double-blind label the equipment in such a way that we would protect people's private property values.
So just
Real
one
briefly.
clarification. I have email confirmation that these are existing wells, not monitoring wells that were put in, I would say, for the first thing. And 2, even if it was 3, that narrows it down from 4. And 2 of those are on the drainage channel. And so where these locations are not, 2 of them are not on the disposal site. This has been handed off to the Corps of Engineers, which is not necessarily their responsibility. I would say it's the county's responsibility and county liability at this point to go and retest these sites to find out with directional push and
Sullivan,
find out
I
what the...
apologize for cutting you off, but I just see so many folks that are going to be speaking today. So I guess just real quickly, is there any data that we've not yet released in the format that redacts the specific property owner's information?
No, all the data that we received was immediately released to the press. We did press releases. We sent it to the board. The reports are posted on the website.
So the data, is
Links.
the data itself on the website?
The data,
To the best
I
of
mean,
your
I would have to
understanding?
check that it hasn't been taken down in the last few weeks, but yes, the data has been posted.
If it's been taken down, and again, I mean, we can have a board vote if need be, but would you mind just putting it back up? Or is that something you wouldn't? Perfect. I think that may resolve it for the time being. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that was it for public comment. We're going to go on to public hearings. Item H is in Hotel H1. Just as we get staff coming up, I did speak with staff about this, Eddie in particular, and I said I had 2 concerns with this item. One, that the residents have adequate notice before they get hit with basically what amounts to a mortgage payment over $1,300 to connect. And I was advised, and step in if I'm wrong about any of this, Eddie, that the information is provided at the time that the request to connect is put through. Is that right? Correct. And then the only other concern that I had, and I don't know that we can address it today, I wanted to make sure that there was some option for folks to be able to pay overtime just because of the amount that we're talking about. But if that's something that you're not prepared to address today, if you could just bring something back to us, once you have a chance to figure out what options are available to let folks have a little time to pay it, I would certainly be interested in that. Otherwise,
Yeah, procedurally,
hang on a second, let me get your mic.
oh, sorry.
Okay, you're good.
Am I
Now
good?
you're off.
Okay.
Now you're on.
Okay. Procedurally, this is the approval of the ordinance. Then the next step would be to come back with the resolution that has the pay amount that gets approved by the commission. So we can have that discussion at that future
Perfect.
agenda.
I appreciate it. So with that, unless someone wants an intro, I'll take a motion. All right, a motion from Commissioner
Second.
Pritchett, a second from Commissioner Smith. Any discussion? Seeing no requests, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Yeah, this is a great item. I can't wait to see this expanded. Item I1, so this is going to be our longer one, the wetlands protection. Before we get started on it, and I will have staff introduce it, I just want to give folks a heads up in terms of the order that you're going to be called in. So if you have to run out and get a drink of water or go to the restroom or something, you're not at the edge of your seat wondering whether you'll be called. I'm just going to go through the first several, and then once we get through that, I'll go through the next several. First up, we'll have Jared Adkins, then we'll have Richard, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing any last names, Ceballos or Ceballos. Then we'll have David Laney, then we'll have David Botto, then Bill DeBusk, then Jack Ratterman, and then I'll go through the next several after that. So, staff. Darcy.
All right. Okay, you've seen most of this information before. I'm going to go through and highlight some of the more important points, and then I have 2 additional options to present from the last time you saw this. The first thing I wanted to address was the county's role versus the state's role in wetland regulation. There are distinct protection requirements to the state for permitting and to the local governments for planning. The state permitting agencies do not consider whether wetland impacts should or should not be allowed. The planning function is the responsibility of the county. So the bottom line of this is right now our comprehensive plan policies are consistent with the planning standards set by the state for county wetlands protection. Okay, I'm going to go right into the options. We'll just go over the other ones briefly. Option 1 was looking at the 1.8%. We can conduct analysis of building department and property appraiser data to determine if typical single-family home sizes have increased since 2011 and modify the 1.8%, which is that 4,000 square feet of impervious area over 5 acres, and see if we can adjust accordingly. We could also, for option 2, we could look at something like Palm Bay has done where they have 1 unit per 3 acres where you have centralized sewer and 1 unit per 5 acre where you are on septic. Option 3 addresses the issue we've had recently with the older subdivisions where wetlands are appearing where they did not used to be, and that's causing a problem for us when people come in to develop those lots, and we'd like to address that issue. Option 4 is new. The conservation element establishes a requirement of no net loss of functional wetlands in Brevard County. As development continues, and it's quite robust right now, the state sometimes is not able to find mitigation credits within the county, so they're going outside the county. We can also assume there may be some mitigation credits coming into the county, but we can't quantify that right now. So we would like to look at that issue and address it. And we also have another, we've done some additional research and we found another option that would really help us with the in-county mitigation. until about 8 years ago, the private sector could do mitigation projects on public lands, and then there was a state prohibition on that. So Governor DeSantis has undone that. Thanks to him, we can now reestablish some in-county mitigation opportunities on public lands for private developers. This sets us up to reconnect with the relationships with the development community for some wins. So we can encourage in-county mitigation and help fulfill the in-county no net loss. EELS will get restoration and monitoring for 5 years. It provides a less expensive mitigation option for developers. So we would like to look into establishing this opportunity again. And I don't think it really, there's no prohibition on it now at the county level. We would just need to look at the process and reestablish that. Lastly, when in-county mitigation is not available, staff has allowed both public and private entities to go out of county. We have not been applying that policy inconsistently. Okay, option 5. Option 5 was to review and analyze Mr. Moya's proposal. Since the agenda report, we've been able to do a lot of research. We don't have a report for you, but we have some initial thoughts that we wanted to share. The first being the basin lines, county lines. We agree with the concept and would like to explore the new language. I think we mentioned in there about doing an inventory about what's going in and out. I'm not sure if that's going to be relevant to us or not, but we could do it if you like. I'm not sure if it would be possible or fruitful. Oh, well.
Relating it back.
Oh, relating it back to option 4, yes. Sorry. And what I'm doing is I'm going through the submittal that Mr. Moya had and going through those different points. So there might be some overlap of some of the stuff we talked about. Recommendation of a countywide wetland inventory. So that was in the proposal. We agree that it's a valuable thing to have, and we actually have a GIS data layer with that information that's available to the public. We have the natural communities, including wetlands, were mapped throughout unincorporated Brevard in 2000 to 2002, with the layer being completed in 2002. Other GIS data layers related to wetlands that we use in our review for development are the National Wetlands Inventory, the St. John's Land Cover Codes, the NRCS Soils Maps, the FEMA Special Flood Hazard Areas, and then aerials from many sources going back for decades. So if the board wished, we could update the natural communities layer. However, that would be quite intensive from what I wasn't here in 2002, but apparently there was helicopters involved and ground truthing all over the county. It was a big effort, so. Okay, well, let's talk about the 1.8%. So there's discussion in the submittal regarding the 1.8% and whether it should have been applied countywide and the lack of data and analysis. As previously discussed, the 1.8% was derived from the 4,000 square feet applied over the density of 1 unit to 5 acres. The countywide application of the 1.8 language was definitely intentional. The board adopted the 1.8% countywide, relaxing the prior wetland standards for all residential, not just the Vieira Company. The staff response regarding the 1.8% that Mr. Moyer references is taken out of context. The comment pondered whether the 1.8% was appropriate when there was a lack of alternative compliance standards that result in environmental benefits, i.e. cluster development and preservation of large wetland areas, the standards that were included for Vieira that they had to abide by, but the rest of the county didn't. So. Prior to the 2010 amendments, so the existing amendments from 2004, there was only one residential policy. There was no de minimis impact allowed. So the intent of applying the 1.8% was to provide flexibility. So again, the pre-2010 had 1 unit to 5 acres, and then, or you could be pre-1988, pre-comp plan to impact wetlands and then had access to wetlands. So. Okay, conservation lands. Could you put up my first? Yeah. Have a map for you.
Let's see. I don't know if we can get this on the back screens too. or the front screens, whichever way you're looking at them.
You can see almost
Thanks.
all of it. There we go. Okay, so on this map here, we have a few features. The purple line that runs down the middle of the county divides it into two areas, one where the water drains west to the St. Johns River and one where the water drains east to the Indian River Lagoon. The lime green is the conservation areas, and the wetlands are in blue. Sorry, this isn't.
When you say blue, you mean the light blue?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
So you can see that the significant amount of the conservation lands are out by the St. Johns River, providing a lot of protection out there. There's less protection around, there's some lime green in Merritt Island, a little less protection for the Indian River Lagoon. So when we talk about the EELS lands, they've always prioritized the upland scrub from the beginning. At the time of the program, wetlands already had protective measures in the comp plan, and uplands did not. So they prioritize upland acquisition. Also, our Scrub Jay habitat management plan required by Endangered Species Act is implemented through the EELS program and the management of those uplands. It's not to say they don't have wetlands, they do, but their priority of acquiring lands was uplands first, and developing corridors. So that is about our conservation lands. Okay, and now we'll talk about the proposed, I swear we're almost done. We'll talk about the proposed amendments. We went through, they look very simple. They're just modifying number 8 or number 7. So, but we're not sure of the overall intent of the proposals. While the 1.8% is stricken in number 7, both amendment options have internal inconsistencies within the comp plan. We still have the residential density of 1 to 5. We still have the requirement for sufficient uplands for the intended use and for buffering, and we still have the allowable uses in number 8. So if the intent is to defer all residential development wetlands to the state and remove all planning aspects of residential wetland policies, it is our opinion that the data analysis is not sufficient, and we question whether either proposal would meet the requirements of Chapter 163, and we also have a likelihood of being challenged. I am personally unaware of any residential development being denied due to the 1.8% or the wetland mitigation issue. We went back and looked at subdivisions since 2010 and the percentage that had wetlands. Tad, correct me if I say this, or do you want to?
Sure. Good morning, Board. So we went back and looked at several subdivisions, and we kind of focused on the Res 4 land use, which is 4 units to the acre. And when we get into the larger developments, we found that there was a yield of 3.5 units to the acre. So what's kind of important to note on that is that those properties did have wetlands, but a lot of the yield that they're not obtaining is for infrastructure. So you have roadways and stormwater, and all of that comes into account, and that can vary from 25% of the overall property up to 35%, depending on the design and the impervious areas. So just something to keep into consideration as you all think about this.
Thank you. We also wanted to make the board aware that depending on the options that you all select today, we have concerns regarding the timeline of the fall submittal deadlines. That full package would be due to planning and development on June 30th. So depending on the level of changes that you all would like to investigate, we may need some additional time. Lastly, we have some more data we can discuss if you'd like. We tried to hit on some of the bigger topics. We have more research on other jurisdictions' regulations, more that's included in the packet, and we have some additional information on mitigation banks if you would like. And with that, unless you have questions now, I think I've presented you our main points.
No, I appreciate it, Darcy. Let me just ask folks up here, do you guys want to just briefly kind of talk about where you're at with this before we have public comment? It may help them gear their comments a little more directly, because I'm happy to do so, but if that's not the consensus, we'll go right in. Commissioner Pritchett?
I'm still on the studying stage, and I told you guys that at the last meeting. The book you gave me was a little overwhelming. I read through all that. It was actually interesting to hear Commissioner Ellis's and Scarborough's comments back and forth. So I'm gonna be listening. I know you guys know there needs to be some changes, and you're ready to deal with that. Mr. Moya came in. He had some good ideas. A question, Darcy, and I told you I was going to ask this here because the question came up to me about us being consistent with the same guidelines as the state of Florida, and you guys replied with?
Our role is different than the state's role. Our role is planning, and the state's role is permitting, and we are currently consistent with the state standards for planning through our comprehensive plan policies and the associated land development regulations.
Okay, because you guys also told me the state doesn't do that. They expect the counties to do
Correct.
it, and then we have to submit it. And from what you sent me, it got sent one time, it got denied, and then we had to go back to work on it a little bit when we were working on some criteria. And the other question I had thrown out to you, and I know this is going to be a little bit time consuming too, my thought was, how do we align with other counties as far as our rules and their rules? My goal is going to be maximum amount of growth with the least amount of impact to the wetlands, which I think should be our goals. And you know what, as developers are trying to do this, they're not bad, they're just trying to develop, so that's okay. And then we're trying to also protect these wetlands because the importance of them is it's really important. So those are going to be my criteria as we move forward, as we start making some changes. So I'm going to be looking for what we can do to allow them to develop that's not going to be a big impact to wetlands, and as far as trying to keep the wetlands in the uplands. So I'm just letting you know that's where I'm at.
Thank you. Commissioner Tobias?
I don't really know how to follow that one because I don't know where that direction actually was. But you presented 1 through 4 to us 2 or 3 months ago. Clearly, you've done quite a bit of work on that one, and that is both friendly to developers that take into consideration the importance of wetland. I think that strikes a balance. I'd like to look at 5 a little bit more, certainly here where some of the residents are on 5, but I greatly appreciate the approach that you presented. I'm sorry, Darcy, 3 months ago, was it?
It was November. So.
At least 2 months ago, and our office has done quite a bit of research on this one. We were comfortable to go support 1 through 4 then. Still comfortable to support 1 through 4, so should there be a motion, I definitely would support that, but want to hear what residents have to say about 5, since that's a new one, and then at the end may have some follow-up questions as we move forward.
Okay.
Commissioner Isnardi, do you have anything to chime in with? Commissioner Smith?
Well, I would like to just mention the fact that I, like I'm sure the rest of my fellow commissioners, I'm very property rights oriented. But at the same time, I understand we have a duty to the citizens presently and in the future to bring responsible growth to this county. I've said it over and over again. I don't want this to become Brevard County. So we have to walk a fine balance, because I know if you own property, you should have a right to sell it. But at the same time, there has to be some responsibility and responsible development done at the same time. So that's where I'm at.
And I'll jump in at this point. I think this is just to kind of dovetail off what Commissioner Smith said, a question of striking an appropriate balance, which we may or may not already have, between property owners' rights and not doing harm to our neighbors. It's always a balance. I don't think there's an objective way of really getting this to perfection. With that said, as far as where I am today, because I've received a lot of emails, even from some of you that are sitting there, I want to thank you for the folks that emailed me, and an extra thank you for those who let me know they were or were not in my district. It makes it a lot easier. What I can tell you is, when I look at property issues, I understand that a lot of them do have overlap from one district to another. But that said, my general feeling is one where, unless there is an exceptionally compelling reason, to let each commissioner handle their district as they deem appropriate, because their constituents are the ones that they have to answer to. And either they're going to be happy or they're going to be unhappy with them, and either they're going to retain the seat or they're not, presuming they run again. With that said, I did check over the past several days to see whether or not, and I'm not saying that this is something that's appropriate or inappropriate to do, but to see whether or not it is logistically feasible and lawful to have different standards based on the district. Because I, at this point, and unless I hear something unbelievably compelling today, don't anticipate changing my position at this point. I'm basically fine with where it's at with the 1.8%. I'm not saying that's a perfect number. I do have some concerns with how it was arrived upon, and I'm not saying that I'm inflexible with considering other options, but as of today, if I had to vote and that vote would apply in my district, I'd be voting no. I will tell you, though, that we can have a system where we retain the existing evaluation process for those districts that want it, while implementing something totally different in other districts. So if someone wants to move to do something that changes the system, if it entails my district as well, I'm going to vote no for it today. I'm not saying in the future, once I've had an opportunity to digest some more of this, that there might not be some flexibility, but I'm just not convinced with everything that I've seen in writing at this point. So with that, we'll go into public comment, and then obviously we'll have an opportunity to hash it out.
Can we do that by district?
Yeah, and Ms. Bentley, could you jump in as well? Because Commissioner Pritchett was just asking if it is feasible to do it by district.
If the data and analysis supports it. So it would need further examination by staff and more analytics.
Okay, because I probably would leave it alone for my district also. Again,
Yeah,
I was opening up the thought if we had other districts that have substantial things that they want to change, but I think it's appropriate for my district
And I
also.
know Commissioner Pritchett has a chunk of North Merritt Island as well, on the north side of the Space Center, and in particular in my district, the barrier islands are what really causes me the greatest concern. I live in Rockledge. I don't think that we have the same concerns that Merritt Island happens to have, but with the barrier islands making a substantial chunk of my district, I just can't see changing it with what I've seen so far. But just something to keep in mind as you're hearing public comment either way. All right, Jared Atkins, first up from Scottsmore. And just to save everyone a little time, I'm just going to say the city that you're in so you don't have to reintroduce yourself and save the city. Just use your full 3 minutes. Morning, sir.
Okay, mine will be pretty quick. Not going to spend a whole lot of time here, but I'm going to put a picture down here on the projector. I don't know.
And Logan, if you're back there, I don't know if you can control. Thank you. Appreciate it.
That's good, thanks. Okay, that's actually my wife's aunt, about 45 years ago, kayaking in the river, in the Indian River, okay? Beautiful, right? Looks like Bahamas. So, while we're just checking that picture out, I would just like to say a couple things. So, a couple years ago, I voted, along with the majority of people, to give our government more money to work toward cleaning the river up and preserving what we have left. Goes against everything that I believe in, to give the government more money because you never know what's going to happen with it. But we had to give it a shot because, looking at pictures like this, what it used to look like and what potentially it could look like again, we just had to take the risk and roll the dice. So personally, I just feel that eviscerating more of the protections on the wetlands are not going to work toward the goal that we're working toward. It's going to counteract it. And I think if we allow mitigation credits to go in other counties, it doesn't do our lagoon here any good. So just personally, as a taxpayer and as a resident, I would just like to see them stay as they are, the protections that we have right now. And I also brought a picture of a more recent person kayaking in the river. So there we go. Okay, I got to turn it sideways again.
Yeah, the side-by-side's pretty telling.
Yeah, so, I mean, come on. We need the wetlands, right? So that's all I really have to say. I'm no expert, but I mean, a picture tells 1,000 words. So this equals 2,000 words. Okay. Okay. Thanks for hearing me.
Thank you, sir. All right, next up, we have Richard, is it Ceballos? Ceballos? I'm terrible with names, I apologize. But I promise if you tell me, I'll do my best to get it right next time.
My name is Richard Ceballos.
Ceballos.
Can be pronounced in Spanish as Ceballos. I live on Sunset Avenue in Scottsmore.
Perfect,
I am
sir.
a grove owner. I've owned a citrus grove for the last 17 years there. The grove is 1 mile inland from the Mosquito Lagoon. My concerns are about saltwater intrusion. I have evidence of saltwater intrusion on my grove and to my business. So far, 300 dead trees. I'm concerned that if we don't protect the wetlands, it's going to get worse. And not only will it be affecting my grove, but more importantly, the wells. Not only my well, but everybody's well, including the developers who intend to put more wells out there. So that's my concern. I hope we don't make it worse. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Then also from Scottsmore, we have David Laney. Welcome, sir.
Good morning.
Morning.
And I too am going to try your overhead projector here. Let's see, how many times have they had to turn it? Is that close? I can't see what's being projected.
Hey, Logan, could we get him on these again? Thanks.
Okay, good morning, Commissioners. Good to see you again. Happy New Year. First time I've seen you. My name is David Laney, 3800 Sam's Lane, Scottsmore, and I've had some dental work, so if I sound funny, I am Irish, but I have not been drinking yet this morning, just so you know. First of all, I would like to thank the staff for the work that they have done. I spent most of yesterday afternoon, yesterday evening, reading the briefing package for this meeting, and the work that the staff has done, considering that the requirements for something to be submitted for an amendment to the long-range comprehensive plan include, under Brevard County ordinance, that submit the following information to Planning Development Service Department in order to get a requested change into the system. It requires identification of the element, citation of existing language, the proposed revisions, and a written statement explaining the rationale and appropriate data and analysis necessary to support the proposed change. From what the staff has said, they were provided with none of that. They were not provided with this change, and they only got the change request proposal as a result of one of you who submitted it to them. Now, having said that, Brevard County Long Range Comprehensive Plan Objective 5, preserve, protect, restore, and replace wetlands to achieve no net loss of functional wetlands in Brevard County after September 1990. One of the changes that we'll first address here that's requested is to allow mitigation of wetlands loss in Brevard County to be conducted across basins which straddle the county line. Now, this is actually included in your staff report, which I'm sure all of you stayed up last night reading. If that were allowed, that would allow mitigation across 7 different counties in Central Florida. So wetlands mitigation for wetlands lost in Brevard County could be, Osceola County, Orange County, Seminole County, Okeechobee County, and Indian River County. None of that which lends itself to support and compliance with Objective 5 of the Long Range Comprehensive Plan of Brevard County. No net loss wetlands, Brevard County. What it also would not do is allow for effective wetlands functioning on the east side of Brevard County as the way the basin drains. Not water that goes to the St. Johns River, water that goes to the lagoon. I know my time's running quickly here, so the request for the 1.8% and to change the section 587, what's not noted, and as staff did touch on that that actually cascades back through the entire comprehensive plan and where the restrictions are on development of wetlands. Policy 5.2.E.1, residential and wetlands parcel, that references back to that limitation. 5.2.E.2a, residential land use is not part of a formal subdivision, references back to that limitation. The complete eradication of that section eviscerates wetlands control and planning in Brevard County Comprehensive Plan.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your time.
All right, next up, we have David Botto from Indian Harbor Beach.
That's a friend of mine. David Botto. I'm representing the Marine Resources Council. I think we've made our position very clear over the years that we consider wetlands crucial to the long-term health of the lagoon, crucial. And that is giving even more urgency now because of the estimated population growth, which if you've been following the 2070 plan, is estimated to go to 32 million in the state. They're coming in at a rate of over 600 a day. Every single one of those represents about a little over 500 square feet, and this is a conservative estimate. Every one of them over 500 square feet of impervious surface. As we struggle to maintain that proper balance of pervious to impervious surfaces for the lagoon, a wetland is not just another pervious surface. A wetland is the perfect pervious surface. It provides storage for water and allows it to percolate, none of which ends up as runoff into the lagoon. We believe that the comprehensive plan is designated constitutional law. It should not be easy to change the comprehensive plan. It should be difficult. It should be strong, clear evidence that is in the public interest. We believe that wetlands are definitely in the public interest if we are concerned about the future of the lagoon. We believe we should not change that plan unless there is that clear evidence. As regard to the interesting political divisions you mentioned, John Muir, who is the guy that convinced Teddy Roosevelt to establish Yellowstone National Park, the first national park in the world, said every single human in the United States lives in a drainage basin. And that's where the division should be made for representation. It should be by drainage basin. That's an interesting aspect, I think. This drainage basin for the Indian River Lagoon is all of ours. And any change that will weaken our ability to manage wetlands development is not a good change. We recommend that you hold your state. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Jack Ratterman. From, of course, Merritt Island. Good to see you, Jack.
Good morning. Good morning, Jack Ratterman, 568 East Hall Road, Merritt Island, Florida. We live in a fascinating place to me. There's no other state that captures the utopic and disparate qualities of modern American life, the light, the dark, the dream, the nightmare, better than the Sunshine State. As a harbinger of the America to come, it is not surprising that the dissonant and the dynamics of Florida, of American culture occur more vividly here at the edge of the continent, where people come to reinvent themselves, start over, or just retire in the sunshine. Nowhere is our complex state better reflected than in Florida wetlands. Wetlands are a biological community of unique interacting organisms, a complex ecosystem that highlights the surrounding health of our fauna and flora of our diverse Everglades state. What do? They prevent flooding. They filter and purify water. Their vegetation feeds marine life in the rivers, lakes, and lagoons. Counterbalance human effects by rejuvenating surrounding ecosystems. Many animals use them for food, migration, and reproduction. They are not isolated. they are or independent. To the contrary, wetlands are valid to the health of all our bios, wildlife, and humans. Wetlands directly improve our ecosystems because of its many cleaning benefits and are often compared to kidneys, which control water flow and clean the system. This past Sunday, Greg Warmoth at Channel 9 featured the Indian River Lagoon and their Central Florida Spotlight. Our guests included Virginia Barker, and a clip from Governor Ron DeSantis stating, "Key to our economic well-being is the good health of our water. It is the foundation of making Florida the top fishing and boating destination in the world and to enhancing our property values." Being a good steward to our environment and our lagoon, our tourist industry, and our Everglades states are wetlands. They must be preserved, retained for good environmental and economic health. Florida kidneys are organs we cannot do without. We cannot live without. Once damaged or removed, our demise will soon follow this ill-advised decision. In the past years, we, all of us here, thank you.
You can finish the sentence.
In the past years, we, all of us here, have gotten together at this government center to plan and coordinate the future of our county and our state. I hope this is a special moment this year when the vote is taken. We protect and preserve our wetlands, making the correct decision. When other concerned citizens, crackers and mosquito beaters alike, look upon what was achieved here, they will give a standing ovation and be joined by the likes of Rachel Carson, Theodore Roosevelt, John Muir, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, and look down upon this meeting. So I ask you to deny this comp plan amendment. Thank you.
That was a long sentence, Jack. Thank you. Yeah, you just kept going, so my props to you. All right, so the next several we're going to call, just so you all know the order, it'll be Darlene Hellers. Do you think that's an H or a K at the end? Oh, I think it's a K. Michael Myjack, Joe Shem, Dwight Severs, or Stevens? Severs. And then Phil Bernardo and Bruce Moya in that order. So let's go ahead with Darlene Hillers from Merritt Island.
Good morning. My name's Darlene Hillers. I live at 4645 Seminole Trail in Merritt Island. And I just learned about this proposed change just recently. And I'm very much about the environment, and I feel that our wetlands are extremely important. I'm a little confused about the wording of these amendments. To me, it sounds like the developers want to build on a wetland, but because of the mitigation process, they will be moved somewhere else. And from talking with some people that I know, it sounds like the developers are wanting to push it a little further out of Brevard County, which to me does not make sense. I mean, how is that going to benefit us if we take away one of our wetlands and we put it in another county? So wetlands are very vital to our environment. They protect our neighbors from being flooding, the natural flow of water and where it goes. So I'm asking you to please vote no on these proposed amendments. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Michael, I mean, you said that was a K, you think? Myjack? Yep. All right. I'm trying. And you're from Titusville, sir?
I am.
All right. You have the floor.
I'm surprised to be up here so early. I figured I'd hear from more of our citizens and get more of the science that you guys are. But you already know all of that, or I know Virginia does. Our lagoon and our river, the St. Johns River, are two precious water sources that we have. They are the root reason why we're here, why we have this garden paradise in Florida. if we keep removing wetlands from our county, calling them underwater land, if you like, for people to build on, we in the county end up with a net loss. And that net loss is not quantified. It's far greater than we can put numbers to. Between the animals and the species that live here, our biodiversity, one of the strongest, if not the highest in the nation. Over 4,000 different species live here. But if you take away the wetlands, most of those will be gone. Wetlands are vital. They're vital to clean the water. They're vital for our health and our well-being. We need to save them, and we need to save more of them, not less of them. So if you would, please vote against this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And we just got another card here, and I apologize, I may have missed someone earlier. Bill DeBusk from West Melbourne. I'm sorry, I apologize. I don't know how I missed over.
I think cards just got stuck together.
Yeah, I promise I wasn't trying to skip you by any means.
I didn't think so.
I'll give you a couple extra seconds to make up for it.
Probably don't need that. I don't have a whole lot here. I'm here today with the Turtle Coast Sierra Club, and we're here to ask you to vote no on these proposed amendments to the wetlands protections in the comprehensive plan. As many people have said, wetlands are vital to the health of and environment here in Brevard County. They prevent flooding events, which I really want to talk about more in this discussion this morning. Wetlands act as filters that protect the Indian River Lagoon, and they act as an area that pools water so they can go back into our aquifers for our fresh water. And there's a recent event that I'd like to highlight today that kind of shows why we need it for flooding. My wife's sister and her husband live down in Surfside, a community just north of Miami Beach. And less than a month ago, on December 23rd, they had what some places term as a precipitation, well, it's a heavy precipitation event. They had heavy rains, unusually heavy rains, especially for the wintertime. They had 6 to 12 inches of rain down there. Their home was flooded not far away from there. Their son lives in Hollywood, Florida. His car was flooded and actually totaled. There was, property loss and flooding throughout Fort Lauderdale and Hollywood and Miami. Less than a month ago, it included even closing temporarily the airport, the Fort Lauderdale airport, for flooding. These events, are going to continue, and they're going to continue with greater frequency. There's actually an organization called the U.S. Global Change Research Program. It's mandated by Congress to study stuff like this, and they essentially concluded that we're going to see more and more of these type of extreme rain events in the United States as time goes on. So the problem is clear. It's here at our doorstep. We need these wetlands to help us, among other things, protect us from flooding, and flooding that will probably increase as we move on in the future. We need these wetlands to safeguard our citizens from this type of flooding. Here in Brevard County, less than 200 miles from where this type of recent rain event occurred less than a month ago. So we're asking you to vote no and maintain these vital protections for our wetlands. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. And again, I apologize about the confusion there.
No problem.
Thanks again for your patience. All right, next up is Joe Shim from Cocoa.
Good morning. Sustainability is a very important issue to me, and I'm actually a member of the City of Cocoa Sustainability Advisory Committee. But I'm really here today because I'm the current president of the League of Women Voters of the Space Coast. The League has a very deep interest in sustainability, conservation, and preserving the natural resources of the county with a strong commitment to protecting natural wetlands. Members of the League are deeply concerned about the proposed amendment to the Brevard County Comprehensive Plan that would start the process of dismantling the county's residential wetland policy. These proposed changes do not seem to be in the interest of good sustainability practices for the county, Sustainability means that a process or state can be maintained at a certain level for as long as is wanted, with sustainable development being development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Here are some of the changes we can expect should these amendments be introduced. There will be an increased flooding, as we've heard from many other speakers, flooding of homes, properties, and streets, and consequentially increased expenses for the county. Wildlife adapted to wetland environments will be threatened. Increased development around the Indian Lagoon will negate all the cleanup work that has been done to date and paid for by county residents. It will also negatively impact tourism and quality of life for all who live in Brevard. The bottom line is that we do not want to see any changes to the current wetland policy, and we urge the County Commission not to pass the proposed amendments. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, next up we have Dwight Severs. Severs. My apology. All right, hundreds of years.
Mr. Severs, I'd like to say hello. Was our city attorney. I just told him for hundreds of years. And you're a wonderful person. I just wanted to open up with that.
What's the secret?
Good morning. My name is Dwight Severs, a resident of Brevard County for more than 50 years. I served as a city attorney for Titusville for 40 years, and also additional time as amicus curiae, etc. In any event, I've handled numerous cases involving local government issues. I've handled many issues involving the drafting, reviewing, and preparation of comprehensive plan, litigating their enforcement, etc. After retirement for the last 5 years, I decided to join the Planning and Zoning Commission of Titusville. As a matter of fact, we're in the process of reviewing the 2040 plan, and that's an interesting experience for me. I have served more than 50 different council members, 6 different managers, and one of the unique experiences as a city attorney is you get to observe the political process and the development process and the pressure of those in favor and those against. I live on the Indian River and have observed firsthand the degradation of the Indian River and the current pressure to develop marginal lands and the impact it continues to have upon the lagoon, wetlands, etc. As a resident and taxpayer, I've supported taxing ourselves in an effort to try to improve the water quality. Many problems in my mind could have been mitigated or avoided with proper planning and development. Deferring to the St. John's Water Management District is a part of the problem, not the solution, and that's based upon personal review of plans and see what they require or don't require. My life experience as an attorney, my personal beliefs, and my faith tell me we need to become better stewards of our environment and protect God's creation. I really believe that. Why should you support any amendment to the comprehensive plan that has the potential of allowing more development of wetlands and degrade the functional value thereof? The idea of buying mitigation lands in Volusia County, how is that going to protect the Indian River? The proposed change should be denied, and you move forward with other and more important business of the county and not in any way degrade or change your wetland regulations so as to cause potential harm. Have we not learned something from all this permitting process and the history behind us? The consequences of previous permitting as such. Do we really want to cause further degradation of our environment? I respectfully suggest you should leave things as they are. Do not change the regulations. Thank you.
You timed that perfectly. Thank you. All right, Phil Bernardo from Merritt Island. Welcome.
Good morning. I'm Phil Bernardo. I live at 4440 North Tropical Trail on Merritt Island. I've been a resident of Brevard County and North Merritt Island in particular for the last 32 years. And I'm opposed to all of the proposed changes to the comprehensive plan. In other words, any change to the 1.8% limitation, and I'm opposed to the mitigation changes. I understand, I think the 1.8% was, some time ago, was a recommendation from the Sierra Club. I'm opposed to these changes for three main reasons. First of all, I believe it's going to contribute to flooding problems in the county and in North Merritt Island in particular. Number two, I think it's going to impact my property value. And number three, because I believe it will have a negative impact on the environment. So first of all, I think, as you know, North Merritt Island's been seeing growth in housing densities at an ever-increasing rate. Quite a bit of the land on North Merritt Island is low, and a lot of it is designated as wetland. Whether it's poor quality or not, it's designated as wetland. And what we're seeing is, as these low-lying areas are getting filled in, you're seeing more and more flooding. You're seeing homes that never flooded in the past are starting to flood now. So filling in existing wetlands is only going to make this worse. And I think it's already been mentioned, during any major storm event, wetlands help to absorb storm surges. My house has never flooded in all the time I've lived there, 32 years, but there are flood-prone areas nearby. There's a hammock behind my house. And if the flooding continues to get worse in these areas, North Merritt Island is going to be labeled as a flood-prone area. People aren't going to want to move there. They're not going to want to, my property values are going to go down. And then number three, I think you'll all agree, wetlands are beneficial to both plants and wildlife, but they're also good for the Indian River Lagoon. On North Merritt Island, we have a river on either side of us. During a major storm event, wetlands help to filter runoff before it enters the river. And I don't believe that the rights of developers should take priority over these environmental concerns. So again, I'm opposed to the proposed changes because, number one, they're going to contribute to existing flooding problems. Number two, they're going to impact my property value. And number three, I think most important is that they're detrimental to our environment and to the Indian River Lagoon in particular. That's all.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
All right, before we call up Mr. Moya, I just want to give you the next round of speakers here. We have quite a few. After Mr. Moya, we'll have Ann Briggs from Micco, Mary Sfar from Cocoa, Linda Beret, B-E-H-R-E-T from Vieira, Stuart Buchanan from Titusville, and Sandra Sullivan from South Patrick Shores. And just before you start, Mr. Moya, I know that there are folks that have a lot of intense feelings with respect to the subject. I will tell you, and please just consider this well-intentioned, please give him his 3 minutes. He's been respectful and has given everyone their 3 minutes. If anyone is in any way disruptive, I'm going to ask the deputies to do what they need to in order to maintain order, but I'm sure we'll all conduct ourselves appropriately. Mr. Moya.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioners. I appreciate that, and good morning. Okay, good, because I don't know how to use it. I've never had to use this before, so I'm hoping we can put a lot of minds at ease here, because really the reason we were here was direction by the board after the March 7th, 2019 hearing, where the direction was to make sure that we were consistent with the minimum standards set forth by the state in the St. Johns River Water Management District. Brevard County has a lot of different parts of their code and their comp plan that's way stricter than what the St. Johns requires. They're actually one of the few municipalities that require this. I'm not aware of any other municipality in Brevard County that has requirements over and above that of St. Johns. So what we wanted to do was just really address two of them. And one of them really, I think now, is just a house cleaning item. So the 1.8% was part of a Vieira substantial deviation where they agreed to go 1.8% of the wetland impacts because they have a planned community where they planned all their mitigation, they planned all their impacts, and then that was adopted countywide. Not really sure why. I've got my suspicions, but so that was submitted to the Department of the at that time it was the DCA, which is now the DEO, and it was passed. This was not part of any stipulated settlement agreement. It was just a requirement that they were going to do that. And then as we've been meeting with you and talking about this, we obtained a memo from the Natural Resources Office that basically said that 1.8% does not, doesn't mean you can't mitigate for that. So if you mitigate for any impacted wetlands, you still meet that no net loss. So the 1.8% really does not apply to keeping you from doing wetland impacts on like a subdivision, like a PUD or something of larger. It's really more for if you're one single family home where you say you're 100% wetlands, you have to minimize your impact to that wetland. So with that memo being provided, I think it's just for clarity of the code and how people read it and how it's interpreted and how it's handled through the staff. It should be clear. So we wanted to get that fixed. And the other thing was just simply that water doesn't know political boundaries. Water only knows basins. So if you're in a basin and you mitigate in that basin, you should be able to mitigate in that basin regardless of where the county line falls. So if you're half in, half out, like say Farmington is, you should be able to mitigate in that basin as opposed to just saying, here's the county line. And also, other counties, they mitigate in our county too as well, because if you're in the basin, you're in that basin. So it's just those two things, very simple, housekeeping of that 1.8% and allowing, and this is not just for private development, it's also for public development that will allow the county to be able to mitigate for anything like a road project where they would have to mitigate outside the county. So
Thank you, Mr. Moya.
Thank you.
I appreciate it, sir. All right, next up we have Ann Briggs from MICO.
Good morning.
Morning.
Today I'm speaking on behalf of the MICO Homeowners Association. I'm the secretary, and I'd like to read the letter that they sent to you.
Please.
The MICO Homeowners Association is opposed to any comprehensive plan or policy change regarding residential wetlands. We are opposed to the destruction or filling in of any natural wetlands in any residential area in Brevard County. The job of wetlands is to filter pollutants like nitrogen, phosphorus, pesticides, etc., before the water flows into the creeks and canals and rivers that ultimately flow into the Indian River Lagoon. Wetlands provide habitat for a wide variety of native plants and wildlife. Wetlands serve as nurseries for salt and freshwater fish that eventually support commercial, ecological, and tourist needs. Wetlands recharge groundwater, which benefit us all. Wetlands act as a sponge to prevent flood damage to residential homes. Please, do the right thing for Brevard County and vote no for the proposed residential wetland comprehensive plan change. We thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mary Spar from COCO.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm Mary Spar from COCO, and I'm speaking for Sierra Club. Sierra Club opposes the amendments proposed by Mr. Moya and Mr. Buchanan. And due to the 3-minute time limit, I'll stick to our strong opposition to the second of Mr. Moya's amendments intended to get rid of the residential wetlands impact limitation of 1.8%, except within the Vieira DRI. It appears that those who propose this amendment want an applicant to be able to fill as many wetlands as St. Johns River Water Management District or the Army Corps of Engineers will let them. What would that do to North Merritt Island and the Indian River Lagoon? We realize that the 1.8% limitation may be working too well in some people's minds. Some of you may think 1.8% is arbitrary and something cooked up just for the Vieira Company. The truth is that it is an old requirement going back to before 1995. Before 2009, it was expressed as 1 dwelling unit per 5 acres. Since this requirement, now expressed as 1.8%, predates the 1995 Burt Harris Act, no Burt Harris litigation can be brought against this application. Please think about that. The Vieira Company negotiations were very challenging, since at first the Vieira Company wanted its own wetlands policies, not the limitations imposed on all other development. Some of us saw a way for for Vieira to follow the existing county rules and convinced the Vieira company it was possible. Then all parties began the task of expanding the policies to cover every situation with the same meaningful and predictable standards. The expression of 1 unit per 5 acres as 1.8% was the final breakthrough. Now you are faced with a proposed amendment intended to rip the heart out of the residential wetlands policies. This amendment aims to eliminate the 1.8% limitation except within the borders of the Vieira DRI. It's so ironic, after all the work during the Vieira negotiations to ensure a consistent and predictable 1.8% wetlands impact limitation that would apply to all residential development. Sierra Club urges you to please stop this amendment today in its tracks. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up is Linda Beret from Vieira.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Linda Barrett.
All right.
Not bad.
Sorry.
And I am here to speak as a resident of Brevard about this proposal or these proposals. You've heard already that we need our wetlands to help stave off further flooding. North Merritt Island is a prime example of this, but there are other areas too. And we need it to stave off worse pollution to our Indian River Lagoon that we're working so hard to unpollute. The only way to keep our wetlands strong and to keep them doing this is to keep the residential wetlands language that we already have in our comp plan, limiting the development to 1.8% of the property and not allowing mitigation in other counties. I don't know, perhaps that rule was put in as a proposal before the governor re-allowed in-county mitigation on public lands. That's a possibility, but really, we're Brevard. We need the mitigation to stay here in Brevard if the wetlands must be built upon. So basically, I'm here asking you to vote against these proposals and let the language stand. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, Mr. Buchanan from Titusville.
Could you have me go to the last slide? Very last slide. Thanks. Tell me when I hit it. Do you know what it looks like? Is that one up? One up. And one more. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you, Commissioners. I'll be very brief. Stuart Buchanan. My working address is P.O. Box 1545, Titusville, Florida, 32781. Again, I'll be very brief. There's 4 items that I'd like to touch upon. The first one is we heard staff talk about what we spoke of in our report, that the wetlands inventory is over 18 years old. It's from 2002. We absolutely agree that that inventory needs to be updated. Similar to what you've done in North Merritt Island, where you've asked for a study to be done so that you, the commissioners, can have better data to base decisions on. We agree with staff 100%. The inventory needs to be updated. Secondly, you heard talk about mitigation banks and how basins straddle county lines. And we've heard many people talk about how we don't want mitigation for Brevard County projects across those county lines. I would encourage you to ask staff when these comments are done to explain how the reverse is also true. Projects in those 7 counties perform mitigation to our benefit in Brevard. The reverse is true, and that doesn't seem to be taken into account. 3, but we agree completely. We believe that some clarification, which is on the screen right now, needs to take place in the comprehensive plan simply to clarify that basin lines cross county lines. 3, as mentioned, the Natural Resources Management Department provided an interpretation letter which was incredibly helpful. It was immediately sent out to all the civil engineers and different environmental consulting firms in Brevard County. That I have to thank staff. That Natural Resources interpretation letter cleared up many years of misunderstandings in the private sector, I should say. Which brings us to the last slide. We've heard a number of people talk about how they don't want to get rid of the 1.8% as it affects residential properties. That is not proposed. In fact, that language is not touched. In this report that we submitted to the Commission, this was the change. It is, in fact, the exact opposite. The only change is within the DRI boundaries. I wanted to make that extremely clear to the public. We did not touch the 1.8 language as it represents residential development. We only went back to the Vieira substantial deviation. That being said, updating the wetlands inventory, clarifying language on the mitigation banks, the NERMA interpretation letter, we actually absolutely agree with staff on these 3 items. And again, we thank staff for the letter that they issued. The only item that we would ask you to consider is the effect within the Vieira DRI boundaries. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, Sandra Sullivan from South Patrick Shores.
Sandra Sullivan. You know, I've come up here a few times about the wetlands. I brought a book called Mirage. I recommend all of you read it. It basically is about, here in Florida, how no matter how many laws that they pass to protect the wetlands, we see them being destroyed at a faster rate than what they're being put elsewhere. And the artificial ones that they try to create cost billions of dollars, and the net effect is a very big negative. That book has a lot of information. It is actually was part of the FAU curriculum on a 4th-year course, and I highly recommend you read that book. Secondly, I want to say I come from Brevard County, and we still have a home down there, and on the 23rd, both our carport and our Florida room flooded. What we've seen down there, and I look at Brevard as being like Brevard was about 25 years ago, and you're in the same position. When I first went to Brevard, you know, you could go out to Davie and it was horse country. Now it's developed 30 miles further out west than that. The weather has changed to where we used to have afternoon showers every afternoon, and we don't have it. So that's why when we have rain, we have these heavy downpours. Every time we have a heavy downpour, we see flooding. And that's just the nature of South Florida. These wetlands are very crucial, and you're in a position, and I want you to look at Brevard very carefully, because you're like they are 25 years ago, and the decisions that you're making are going to have consequences down the road. I want you to look at Irma, what happened. Irma, those floodplains were 3 feet underwater. And I want to everybody look at the back of the chairs. It says Vieira Company on there. And I looked at the detailed plan a few months ago. And they're destroying areas that are very high diversity areas of wildlife. But more importantly than that is about the quality of water. And I want to mention one other thing, and related to the protection of the wetlands, and that is what we put on it, meaning the biosolids, which we've talked about a lot, but also the muck that we're putting out there right now, which is at the commercial level, up to the commercial level of arsenic. New research is coming out showing that arsenic feeds the algae blooms, the cyanobacteria, and then the research about BMAA, which is causing Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, those things too. All of this research is coming out. There are so many, not just the environmental issues, but also the health issues of what we're doing. Those wetlands need to be protected at all costs. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, Darcy and Virginia, or Virginia, I should say. I'm going to make you guys either the bad guys or the good guys. I'm not sure which yet. Is there anything that you've heard as we're now through public comment that you think needs to be addressed that was either incorrect or stated in a peculiar way? Anything from either side on the issue?
I guess the only question I have is Mr. Buchanan said that there appeared to be a misunderstanding in what was proposed by the changes to the 1.8. And so I don't know if the board wants to try to get clarification on what that meant. You know, while the line that includes 1.8% isn't stricken through, the language that follows that is stricken through is how that 1.8 is applied to all the other residential and mixed-use development. So somehow we're not on the same page in understanding the intent of the changes.
Yeah, Mr. Buchanan, if you'd come up and just, if you wouldn't mind briefly address that.
And I would like to add, they just presented the second option that was in the pack that they submitted, but there was 2 options proposed in the documents they initially sent to the commissioner. So again, clarification.
Thank you. Please, sir.
Thank you. And the staff is absolutely correct. We did present 2 different options, and then when we prepared our presentation for the commission, we went with option 2, which was the least, had the least amount of impact to the comprehensive plan. That's why it was in our presentation to make in front of the commission and the residents today. So the first one, I don't think staff needs any clarification on. The basin lines were all good. And again, I would encourage the commission to ask staff how other counties also perform mitigation in our county across basin lines.
I don't mean to cut you off, but if we could just keep it.
And we'll keep to this
Yeah,
one.
if we could just kind of keep it tightly reined in here.
So if you go back and there was the actual adoption package that was filed with the state of Florida for this amendment, it's 109 pages long. There are 2 pages in particular, which was the data and analysis that you can pull from the state webpage as it relates to this. This actual policy, was written, was part of the substantial deviation for number 2 for Vieira Corporation. And the actual amendment was submitted by the Vieira Corporation to the staff. And then the county commission at the time chose to apply it countywide. That was the county commission at the time's decision. This is a new commission. You have the ability to amend that and go back to the original amendment as proposed by Vieira Corporation. That's it. And it is confusing because we've got a whole new commission. We've got, obviously, some different staff, but hopefully that provides the clarification on how we put this together.
Thank you. Darcy, is there anything else you'd like to ask of him?
So if we go back to the residential policies other than Vieira prior to the Vieira amendment, it's 1 to 5, and it's pre-88s and access to uplands. That's it. There's no de minimis at all. So that means you're going back and you're making it stricter.
No. If you'll notice that we did not propose any changes to the other policies. There is no reason to do so. The 1.8% on the 5-acre parcels makes perfect math. We completely understand that, which is why we didn't touch it. I would also say that your letter, your interpretation had a huge part to play with that. There was a lot of misunderstandings in the private sector, and your letter corrected that. What the commission doesn't have the benefit of is to be able to see the whole chapter in front of you. In other words, see the sections that aren't being changed. And I apologize for that. And again, this is not an amendment that's been filed. This was simply the commission asking staff to provide information, and then we provided information on behalf of the development community. There's no amendment application that's been filed.
Understood.
This is all for the benefit of the commission.
Thank you. All right, I appreciate it, Mr. Buchanan. All right, I don't see any lights. I don't know who wants to bite on this one first. Commissioner Tabaya.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going over the options, options 1 through 4, it appears as though that it's just research that would be brought back to the board for decision-making process, whether or not the size of homes have changed and whether or not we want to go in one direction or another. But and I was in favor of it, but clearly I don't want to put staff in a position where they have to do a whole bunch of extra research above what they've already done to come back to a board to make a decision that that's probably not the best direction to go with a comp plan change. So should I not hear from anyone else that doesn't want to look at that research of things that might have changed since it was done, then I certainly would not want to place that burden, any more burden than we've already placed on staff.
Commissioner Pritchett?
Thank you, sir. I agree with that. Unless the staff has something that they feel that they need to make some changes and research on, because you guys did come back with some ideas and recommendations. Commissioner Lober, I really like your idea if we can divide this out to districts, because I'm pretty comfortable with where we are in our district. And sometimes if we open up, well, I'm not even going to go there right now, but I am interested in Commissioner Isnardi, because I think that she's got a lot of growth going on in her area. And actually, option 2 here with the Palm Bay is interesting to me. And you know what? Her district really does have less impact on the lagoon than the other districts do. So again, that's why I've been real hesitant here, because I don't want to do anything that's going to harm your district. So ma'am, I'd like to hear what you need done. But again, if we can pull these out and I could leave District 1 alone, I'd be very happy. So,
Commissioner Isnardi?
Thank you. Obviously, there needs to be some changes made, because sometimes applying the rules that we have in place do interfere and incorrectly so with people's property rights. And the 1.8% is just a little over the top. I mean, it may be applicable to somebody on a barrier island where you definitely have concerns about flooding. That's why we're doing that study. I mean, we take it seriously, but when you have people who can't even, develop on a smaller piece of property, it seems egregious. So I definitely want to see some changes. I want the board to be at least in the majority agreement of those changes. I don't know that splitting up the districts is the way to go, but I do agree we all are unique. More so, your district, Commissioner Pritchett, and mine is probably more alike than anything close to what Brian's area of Merritt Island, you know what I'm saying? So we do share in that, but I hesitate to make a whole bunch of different rules for different districts. But I think the least restrictive is the smart way to go. I mean, while we defer to St. John's and the Army Corps of Engineers and what the state regulations are, the planning portion is the county's job, but overdoing it is not our job. You know what I mean? And we have to be careful that we're not overdoing it, because the lagoon, everything affects the lagoon, but not everything affects the lagoon, if that makes any sense. I mean, as much as we are investing and as much as we're doing to repair what's been done that took decades to do, modifying a wetlands code that will benefit, people who with the smaller areas and smaller subs is the smart way to go. Because, I mean, you only have to listen to Mr. Moya or go back and look at some of those minutes in the P&Z, and you can see how he may be an engineer and work and develop, but he definitely cares about the environment. He's probably on the odd side of the developer, where you'll see him fighting things that are sort of surprising, that are more environmentally friendly than most developers or engineers would be. So I trust him. I often go to him and ask him questions, because I think he has that good balance between smart, responsible development. So I take his recommendations seriously. I wouldn't go and, necessarily without some sort of evaluation by staff, but I definitely think that we need to fix this wetland code, because Mr. Moya is not the only one that complains about it. He just offered us his input.
Commissioner Smith?
Yeah, I'm having a problem because we have a very diverse county. It is 72 miles long, and you've got everything here. So I find it difficult in my mind, because I'm not an engineer. How do we get one size fits all? That's the dilemma that I see. Personally, I came here with an open mind. I wanted to hear what was said. I've read these things. I've looked at them. And for my particular district, I don't see any changes needed, but I can see what you guys are saying. So that's my quandary. How do we get there?
And I'll jump in on that. Again, I mean, if this is put to a vote to approve it countywide or nothing, I'm not going to support it today. If there's a request to have staff come back with some proposals that involve 3 and 5, for instance, and exempt 1, 2, and 4, and essentially leave us be, if the data supports doing that, I'll happily support that. But I don't really see any other way that the votes would be there to make it go through. Commissioner Isnardi?
Well, because you say that, then perhaps we need to look at districts, and I know that's going to make a little extra work for staff, and maybe some of those issues that you can address in there are, length of area to the lagoon, that kind of stuff. Maybe that, not an individual study, like a comprehensive tens of thousands of dollars study, but I at the same time, even though Commissioner Tabaya and I split Palm Bay, you know, if you only have to go to a meeting to see that we don't always agree either. So maybe not putting our districts together, you know, depending.
If I may, I think I can perhaps help out.
Maybe we will, maybe.
Now, Ms. Bentley, just help me out because you're better with this dirt law than I am by far. In terms of the data supporting it, would you want data to support the change in those areas where change is warranted, or would you want data to support leaving it alone if we're making the change in those areas where it's appropriate to leave it alone? I would figure the former, but I just want to make sure.
The existing regulations have already been approved by the state, so it's for the change that you would need new data and analysis.
Okay, so if let's say 1, 2, and 4 simply aren't interested, right, wrong, or indifferent though we may be, if 3 and 5 want to make this happen, the study, if there is one, would only have to apply to 3 and 5.
I think you're going to need to look at the entire county, because I understand that there are 2 major basins, so you need to look at it comprehensively, and then maybe you can break it down. The experts would have to tell you that. The theory is one thing, the application and the application of the facts to this situation are a little different. So you just have to see how the analysis comes back from the staff.
Okay, so to continue the discussion just a little bit, however it comes back, there's nothing that obligates us to change the areas that we don't want to change, and the only question is within 3 and 5, which portions of 3 and 5, if not the entirety, we're able to change. Is that fairly
That's
accurate?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, so it may be that some small portion or the entirety of that area, we would have a basis to change without having any sort of a liability that would be incurring as a result of the change.
If you have data and analysis.
Commissioner Tabaya?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This breaking up into many fiefdoms is flawed for countless reasons. From a practical reason, we look at this when you know, a certain county wants to ban an additive in a sunscreen, or another county. It gets complicated for businesses to exist in various jurisdictions. But let me go with a more practical one. Every 10 years, we redraw the lines. So what is now County Commission District 3, 6 years from now, maybe part of County Commission District 5 or County Commission District 2. So setting up this stuff arbitrarily is capricious and ill-warranted. You know, I think that much of this needs to at least be studied. But again, if there's only 2 members on the board up here that believes it needs to be restudied, looked at to see what the potential impacts are, I don't think it's fair to put staff through that a massive amount of research. So again, I would support 1 through 4, but I would only support 1 through 4 if there were at least 2 other members that were willing to at least go in with an open mind and look at such things that have been laid out. Has the average house size increased? Where are we putting these mitigation lands? Are we sending more out, or are more coming in? But if the outcome of that data is not going to change an individual's mind up here, which is A-OK and the prerogative of that, it does not make any sense to say, okay, we're going to do this in County Commission District 2 and this in County Commission District 4, because again, those lines are going to change.
Let me jump in on that, Commissioner Tabaya. My concern for my district isn't that it's special because it's District 2 or because it happens to be my district. It's that we have so much water in the district. We have barrier islands. Where I live in Rockledge, if I had a better arm, I could probably throw baseball into the water. Cocoa, same thing. I mean, you have a huge chunk of cocoa that's right on the water that's in District 2. And I just have the concerns. Even North Brevard, if you look toward Titusville and the areas east, you have a ton of it that's on the water. And I have concerns based upon that, not because it's a particular district, but if what you're saying is you'll only support something that applies countywide, then it's clear you're not going to have more than 2 votes, it seems. If you're willing to look at something that may not apply countywide, I have no problem supporting something without negatively impacting those in my district, knowing full well that it may well and almost certainly will be redrawn to some extent, in the coming years. But it's really up to you, because I could go either way with this. I'm not going to lose sleep either way.
Mr. Chair?
Yes,
yeah,
sir.
I think we're pretty clear here. I'm not willing. I think you have a wonderful district. The fact that you're so proud of it is admirable. But my district is, or the district I represent, I'm sorry, is pretty amazing. I don't know if you know this, but Ponce de Leon.
All right, I'm going to
May have
exercise my
landed.
prerogative as chair and cut
America
you off.
may.
Commissioner Pritchett?
I mean, this is ridiculous.
I'm going to cut your mic. Commissioner Pritchett?
I think if you guys can give us an idea of what you want to come back with, I think anytime we get factual knowledge, it helps us in decisions. So I think you guys have already touched on some things that you thought you'd want to take a look at. So I don't think that's probably a bad idea for y'all to come back with some recommendations that you think are equitable to the county. I have no problem with that. Again, but I'm pretty comfortable with North Brevard, what we have going on. I agree, we have a lot of water, and we have a lot of wetlands too. So I would be comfortable with that. But again, I would ask your recommendation right now of what you think would be the direction that you'd like to go. I'm putting you on the spot, but that would be my question.
We don't necessarily have a problem with the 1.8%. We've had, dozens of subdivisions get permitted through the last 10 years with wetlands on them. We do have concerns with the people with the older lots that are coming in to put them through an administrative process for them to impact their wetlands when they have a platted subdivision approved by the county. That's something we would like to address, and I think we need to address the mitigation, because sending it out of county is not, consistent with the comp plan. So we need to figure that out. And I think the opportunity with the public lands is a fantastic one. We'd like to revisit that and work with Mike Knight on that. So that could help the situation greatly. I mean, we can look into what's going in and out. We don't know. We don't have that quantified, so we could do that.
That would be what I would support, sir.
All right, sounds like a motion to have staff research that and come back with recommendations. Is that right? Yes, sir. All right, and I'll second it. Commissioner Tabaya?
Mr. Chair, thank you. How is that? How are these, Darcy? How are these recommendations going to be any different than the 4 that you provided us in this staff report and the one 2 months ago? You've done a lot of work. I appreciate it. I thought those were great recommendations. My question is, what if we send a motion to you? Do you have other ideas up your sleeve?
Well, I think we take the research that we've done and try to actually develop some language that we could send for transmittal. So next time we would come back, further, we narrowed the scope down to 2. I mean, if that's what you guys would like, research the mitigation, research the old lots, and come back to you with specific language as opposed to a concept, because we do need to do more research. Yeah, we got to do the data and analysis that would be submitted to the state.
I'll follow up. Okay, so which I think people are a little hesitant to actually say which options they want, and I went out on a limb and I said option 1, 2, 3, 4. Can you help us which one of those we would actually be sending to you, so we can all be on the record?
Okay, so that would be option 3 is the one that addresses the older lots, and option 4 is the option that addresses the mitigation.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in. I think the mitigation opportunity for government-owned lands is something that is rather smart, and if we have that opportunity, I don't have an initial objection to it. Obviously, I'm going to have to look into it a little bit more prior to voting on it, but it sounds smart.
So, yeah, I feel bad sometimes when I watch these after the ambiguity that we leave staff with. So it sounds like make a motion to accept further research into options 3 and 4.
I think that Commissioner Pritchett's motion essentially gets across what you're trying to do. I mean, it depends. Are staff comfortable with what Commissioner Pritchett moved to do? As far as coming back with options?
I'm not sure, were you wanting to do all of the options or just the ones that we discussed?
Just the ones we discussed
Okay.
that you mentioned that you felt that we needed to investigate.
Yeah, I think that's, in my opinion, that's a good idea, and then we can bring it back for specific public comment.
And then we can have discussion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, clarifying it's option 3 and 4.
Thank you.
All right, perfect. Then my second stands. Commissioner Tobias, I don't know if that's new?
No.
Okay. Any further discussion on it before we vote on the motion? Everyone clear on what the motion is?
Yes.
All right, perfect. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Passes 5-0 unanimously. All right, and unless someone wants to take further action as to this item, I'm going to go ahead and move us through the agenda here. Anything else? Speak now or forever hold your peace. All right, thank you all for coming. All right, J1. So this is the request to approve a public safety summit at a cost not exceeding $1,800. I've attached a email that Matt Wallace sent me with respect to this. If everyone's had a chance to review this, it's pretty self-explanatory. I'm happy to jump into it and address any concerns anyone has, but otherwise I'm happy to accept the motion on it, however you all want to proceed.
Make a motion to approve.
All right, we have a motion from Commissioner Pritchett. I'll second it. Commissioner Tobias.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Just a couple quick questions before we engage in anything.
Yes.
I think it probably would be good to have a measure of success. This may be an absolute wonderful idea, or this may be a tragically horrible idea. My question is how many members of the public do you expect to attend this? So we'll have some marker of whether or not we want to make this an annual event or not.
I don't know that I'd want to opine in advance how many people will show up. I think if it's essentially empty, then we just don't do it in the future. And if it's standing room only, then we either, do it in the future or we find a bigger room. And we find a bigger room, I should say.
My office rarely, if ever, has gotten questions that you mentioned in the agenda report. Is that just the nature of the district in which I represent, or have you received many questions like the ones that you've mentioned in the agenda report?
I've gotten a number of them. Many is obviously a subjective term. I don't know if there's a difference between the districts in terms of what the interest of the individual constituents is, but I can tell you it's something that I think a good number of my constituents would appreciate. I can't say that them appreciating it means that every single one by any means will show up, but I think it's something of interest and it's worth given the de minimis cost. Namely, it's already sunk costs that we're paying staff anyway to be there, unless it's going to preclude them from doing something else that they'd be working on. If part of their core mission is outreach as well, I don't know that the cost to taxpayers is high enough to justify not doing it when we haven't given it a shot in the past. If it's something that we do every year, great. I'm not necessarily looking to do that. If it's something we do every 2 years or 4 years or 10 years, that may be fine as well. I just kind of wanted to see how it goes at an initial try. If it's successful, we'll repeat it.
Thanks. Follow-up. Colonel Wallace's email cites the $1,800. Is that the total cost of staff time, to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, including the sunk cost that we're paying them anyway. But again, I want to qualify that by saying if this doesn't preclude them from doing something else they'd be doing. There may well be some overlap.
So, follow-up.
Please.
I didn't see in his estimate that there were any constitutional officers or their staff that would be included. So perception would be that that's not part of the $1,800. Is that fair to say? Or because this board obviously declared a critical need for sheriff's MSTU, so I'm curious if they will be included in that or no.
Respectfully differ. The way that I read it, and I'm just going to read from the comma forward, our estimated staff costs to host the Public Safety Summit are less than $1,800, period. Next sentence is, this cost includes up to 14 staff members from BCSO, Public Health, Mosquito Control, and Public Safety, and he divvies that up. So my reading of that, just reading plain English, is it does include BCSO costs as well.
Thank you.
Commissioner Pritchett?
I think it's kind of interesting we're doing this. In my feeling, I think public safety, infrastructure, and economic development should be was my core focus on things that I do. So I like that we're doing this. I think the ability to get information out for $1,800, like you said, a lot of that sunk cost. I think this is good. And I'm excited to see how the community responds. But if we can get information in people's hands that even make the sheriff's life's a little easier, I think that this is a great idea. Thank you for it.
Thank you. Commissioner Smith?
Yeah, I think anytime we can get information out to the public is important, but I'm not sure that this is the way to do it. I think it's kind of redundant. That's my personal opinion, but I don't have any problem giving it a try once, but I'd be very surprised if it's worthwhile doing. Let me just say that up front.
I hope that you're wrong, but, I don't claim to know everything, so you may well be right. We'll see.
Well, it's like I said, it's worth a try.
Commissioner Isnardi?
And I would just say that if a department can't absorb $1,800 in their budget, they've got bigger issues. Because I think it's great what you suggested. I think the sheriff just had something out about, some new identification cards to help identify people who have autism and that sort of thing. So that would be a great event for stuff like that to get out for people that don't, peruse Facebook and Instagram. But at the same time, $1,800 shouldn't have to come back to this commission for approval. I mean, maybe approval of the program if that's what staff feels comfortable with. But if we have any department that can't absorb $1,800, we've got bigger issues.
And I'm fine with that, too. And if they have a need, certainly I can have the department come to my office and we'll see if there's some other source that wouldn't come out of the general fund to address it. But, yeah, I'd be fine with that as well. And I don't know if you want to incorporate that into your motion. Commissioner Pritchett? Certainly. All right, and my second will stand with that. So seeing no further discussion, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, passes 5-0 unanimously. So we're going to move along. This next item is J2, dealing with alleged price fixing and whether or not Brevard should participate in a class action lawsuit. My understanding, and I'll jump in and do a little of Eden's job just to try to move this along, is that there's no identifiable downside to participating. Is that right, Ms. Bentley?
Correct.
Okay, so with that, if someone wants to make a motion?
Make a motion to approve.
All right, and I'll go ahead and second it. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Okay, so we'll go into public comment. We don't have any further public comment. Board reports, Mr. Abate?
No report.
Ms. Bentley?
No report.
Commissioner Pritchett?
No report.
I'm going to skip on myself for now and come back. Commissioner Tabaya?
No report.
Commissioner Smith?
Yes, I do have one item. I've had several constituents express concern to my office about our specimen tree ordinance, which I knew nothing about. I've looked into it. I've had some staff get back to me. It would appear the concerns are that the ordinance itself is too lax, and currently 93% of property owners are exempt. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that's why I want to look at it. So Natural Resources is compiling information for me, and I just want to let the board know that sometime in the future, I may be bringing back some legislative intent to address this issue.
Bring it on down. All right, Commissioner Isnardi.
I just want to ask if it's okay if we have staff give us a status update next meeting, even if it's during your report, regarding the renaming of the parkway. And just, at least even if it's just...
We'll be happy to give you an update.
And I know you're working on it, but just kind of give us an idea of the timeline. Thanks. That's it.
All right, I've got a few things here. First off, and I think Commissioner Pritchett, I'm going to direct most of these comments at you, at least for the beginning, because this pertains mostly to your district and my district, or I should say disproportionately, not mostly. It came to my attention, and I know I spoke about this a little while ago, it's probably been months at this point, that I had some conversations trying to get an air show brought back to Brevard County in '21. Since that time, it appears that the Valiant Air Command out of Titusville's airport has lost essentially all of their funding, including the city of Titusville, for their show this year. They're not going to have a show this year either. So this will be the first year in something like 50-plus years. I think the last time we've not had an air show in Brevard County was prior to man stepping foot on the moon. So that's unfortunate, but what I have, at least in concept, lined up at this point, and I am pleasantly surprised that it seems to be working, and I'm going to keep my fingers crossed it continues to work, is Brian Lilly, who put on the Melbourne show. I spoke with him months and months back, along with Matt Wallace from Public Safety, the city manager and the mayor from Cocoa Beach, one of the reps from Patrick, tourism office, a whole bunch of stakeholders to see if we could conceptually get support for a Cocoa Beach air show. I looked at this probably in the ballpark of 8 months ago, and the answer was yes, it looked like it, at least in theory, would work for everyone. The concern, though, is the dates that we had essentially carved out to work toward There was a conflict in the sense that it would be within a week or two of when Valiant Air Command would have their show, and we ended up, and I say we, the folks that I originally sat down with, it's not, you know, any more or less associated with me than Titusville's plans. We ended up in a situation where we would have had those two shows so close in time and relatively close in geography to the point that I think it would be a concern. Some of the teams that were being applied for by one were being applied for by the other, so one of them ended up with the Thunderbirds, the other I think ended up with an F-35 or an F-22 demo. And the thought was, if we can establish some groundwork for combining the two shows such that everyone's at least content, if not happy, that may be in everyone's interest. So we can combine the teams, we can combine the sponsors, we could alternate the locations, which was a really big deal for a lot of the folks. So what seems to be with the higher-ups in each of the two groups that put on their air shows, their respective air shows, at least conceptually acceptable, is in 21, we'll do it in Cocoa Beach, and in 22, we'll do it in Titusville, with the idea being that it will basically bounce back and forth from each of them. I do know that Melbourne's airport has put out either an RFP or some similar document to solicit an air show to come in, but my understanding, and I haven't in all candor read it line by line verbatim, but my understanding of that document is it's so onerous that they're not going to have probably anyone that's able to accept and fulfill those terms apply. So I just wanted to put that out there with respect to that. So now, all right, now I'm done with D1. And this is kind of a little more universal. So I know everyone has seen, heard, and used their other senses to observe what's been going on with respect to the clerk's lawsuit against the county. My objections to waiving our executive session today essentially amount to, I'm not a poker player, but I've seen people play poker and they try not to show each other their hands. My concern was that if we have a situation where one side's showing their hands and the other hand and the other side's not reciprocating that, it's undeniably a bad move. I do appreciate the comments from Commissioner Tabaya and Clerk Ellis insofar as this being a little different in the sense that it's a government entity suing another government entity, which basically means tax dollars are being spent all around. Since that vote was taken where we were 4-1 in favor of maintaining this executive session at the last meeting, Clerk Ellis has agreed and I believe sent in writing to Ms. Bentley and Mr. Abate that he will reciprocate and go ahead, and if we keep our discussions in the open, he'll keep his discussions in the open and waive confidentiality, which as an attorney I have a hard time getting a grip on because I would never ordinarily do this, but I think the unique circumstances are such that if he's willing to show his hand, I don't know that it's a problem for us to show our hand. And I think that with respect to what we do today, there are a couple things I think we need to figure out. One, whether we're going to have the executive session, and two, whether we want to reciprocate, which I think we really ought to at this point, and I'll discuss why to whatever extent folks desire, whether we reciprocate waiving confidentiality insofar as our attorney-client communications are concerned. As far as the executive session, if you boil it down, and I don't think any of this is earth-shattering for anyone, I think there are four options. And this, you know, I'd say inside or outside of an executive session, either we as was, oh, pardon me. Of course, worst possible timing. So one of our options is we simply stipulate to what the clerk wants. I don't think anyone except maybe one of our commissioners up here would be willing to do that. Another option is to settle it. One of the ways to settle it is potentially to have a referendum and agree to put this on the ballot. I don't know, but I would presume that there's probably only one commissioner up here who would support that. We can certainly discuss that further. Another option that we have, a third option to resolve this or push it toward resolution, is essentially fast-tracking this by not making use of the full timelines that we have available to us to file pleadings and to potentially waive different motions to dismiss to get this kicked out before it ever gets to trial. And the fourth option is I think, the smartest option, but it's certainly the most involved option, using every meritorious or potentially meritorious defense that we have, including filing motions to dismiss where it's appropriate. My understanding is that's what the county attorney's position is in recommendation of, to go ahead and essentially explore all meritorious or potentially meritorious motions to dismiss and to to defend this thing to the teeth. I think if we make that decision for purposes of what we'd otherwise be discussing in an executive session, that really would suffice what we would need to discuss. I can tell you as an attorney, putting that hat on for a moment, generally speaking, the strategic decisions are best left to counsel. When you get folks that try to micromanage how they resolve it, that's a problem. I think we need to indicate, however, where we want it resolved, and the manner that we're seeking to get this resolved should be left to them. So if we're inclined to push it in one direction, we let them know. If we're inclined to push it in a different direction, we let them know. But I think we have to decide between those four options unless someone has another option. And then, obviously, we need to discuss the confidentiality aspect, which we may want to do ahead of time if we're discussing these different options. So, I'll tell you, Commissioner Tobias, if you were to make a motion to waive attorney-client privilege in reciprocity with the clerk's office, I would second it, and hopefully we'll have at least one more commissioner out of the remaining three support it. But before we do that, Commissioner Pritchett?
Thank you, sir. And this is just because I'm not an attorney, and I'm really glad we have you up here. Can I ask Ms. Bentley's recommendation on that? Because we've never done it this way before. So if you would kind of...
The executive session is an opportunity.
Your mic's off.
The executive session is an opportunity for the board to talk to one another about their legal situation. And it is a very limited form of attorney-client privilege because you're protected from the sunshine in that instance. A blanket waiver of attorney-client privilege is a different question. So I think you've got two questions today as it's been presented. Do you want to proceed to the executive session and talk about this case in private? You could waive that. That is the board's right. It is not the county attorney's right. It's the board's right to have that protected discussion. And as a collegial body, it is possible to waive that protection. You could speak in public if you chose to do so. I'm an attorney. I would never tell you to waive rights. So I would recommend the executive session. However, if the board were to choose option number 4, or 1, 2, 3, or 4, any of those options, I certainly understand that direction. So that issue is step 1. Attorney-client privilege, I think we need to define that more precisely for future issues. So I would suggest that one needs a little more fleshing out. But executive session, proceed or not to proceed, that's a limited question.
Okay. Commissioner Loper, then on us not going in and breaking off into the closed session, what do you feel that is the, what's the word I'm looking for? What's the advantage of us doing that?
Well, I think the spot that we find ourselves in is one where, unfortunately, we've had individuals, and not all elected officials, in fact, that have suggested that us doing things in a way that, quite frankly, is routine is somehow inappropriate, and I'd like to dispel that. I always look at it as a risk versus reward question. What's the risk of discussing something in open, in the public versus the reward? I think the risk, knowing what I know in terms of having had discussions with both Abby and Ms. Bentley from County Legal, I don't know that there really is any glaring risk to us by having the discussion. If we had some major weakness in our case that we didn't want to get out, I would have the opposite position and say there's no way that we're waiving anything. Now, in terms of the other question about waiving privilege, what I contemplate that to include is any discussions that any of us, the 5 of us as the 1/5 clients, or however you want to term us individually, any of us have with County Legal about this particular issue, whether it's a settlement question or a litigation strategy question, I would contemplate that as being included. What I do not contemplate as being included, and what I think is outside the scope of attorney-client, is their internal work product. So if they have documents that they've drafted for their own purposes that they've not given to us, I don't believe that's something that should be included in that. I think that's totally inappropriate to include, and I would suggest it would be rather inappropriate were legal not to tell us the same. I don't think that that's something that's appropriate, but I think from our positioning for the benefit of the public to understand there really is nothing that we're hiding. It's simply a question of interpreting what a finding of a critical need being valid for only a year means, and whether or not the motions to dismiss or motion to dismiss is valid. I think that's something that's a different question altogether and best left to counsel.
Okay.
But that's my recommendation. I'll acknowledge it's atypical, and were I the attorney for this body, I would be very skeptical about waiving anything, just as Ms. Bentley said. But I think that given given what I know of our position, and I've made a point to know as much as I can about our position, if there were ever a time in which it would be appropriate to waive privilege, or let's take a step back, to waive the executive session, I think this would probably be about the safest case to do that in.
Okay, thank you.
All right, no more lights? Commissioner Nardi?
Yeah, I definitely don't have a problem with it, only because I think that we've, at least stated our position publicly already, that, we believe that we made a good, solid legal decision. Because another elected official disagrees with that decision, so be it. What's sad is that I think that the county commission, or at least our position, I think will prevail, and it'll have costed us double, because it's taxpayer money that are paying for these attorneys. So I have no problem with being transparent throughout it. I didn't realize, again, that, as you discussed, that we would be getting information as well on their strategy. Which
And Ms. Bentley, can you jump in?
The whole thing is a circus, and it's political, but that's besides the point. So we'll take it to court, we'll be judged there.
I apologize. Ms. Bentley, can you chime in and just kind of give us a recap of the email that you'd received from the clerk?
It was very brief, asking that the attorney start to disclose emails, that sort of thing. What emails do we have, that sort of thing. I haven't seen anything yet. I don't know the extent of the disclosures.
Okay, and I think when we make if we get to the point where we make a motion putting the executive session to the side for the moment about waiving confidentiality, we make it clear in that motion that this is done only if the clerk's office agrees to reciprocate it. Otherwise, we're just giving them a benefit with no gain whatsoever on our side. So to step back, Commissioner Pritchett, is that an old one? A new one?
So my question is now, are we going to discuss what we want it to do as a strategy, or are we going to take a vote first on this, or what's next steps?
I think the logical way to handle this is to determine whether or not we're going to go into executive session.
Okay.
As I said, I invited Commissioner Tobias, since I think his motion was the closest to what I'm proposing at this point, and I figured he would be the most supportive of it, to make the motion to waive executive session, which I would support. But we've got a couple more lights. Commissioner Tobias?
Thank you. I know this may be a formality, but we just increased the amount of costs that are associated with public record requests, and I would like to waive all associated public record requests fees when we're sharing information with the clerk's office. Hopefully they reciprocate with that, but goodness gracious, this could get even more expensive as things went on.
I certainly don't have any objection to the clerk making their own decisions in terms of public records requests, but I think that would kind of set the opposite example of what we were looking, or the opposite impression that as we were looking to do before. Essentially, we're trying to wipe out our costs and wash them. So I appreciate it. I don't know that this is necessarily more or less valuable for taxpayers to have access to than any other business that we deal with. So I would oppose that, but certainly if you have a majority of the board, you're welcome to make the motion.
I'm just I'm just trying to understand this. Taxpayers are on both ends of this, correct?
Right.
So we are going to charge taxpayers on the other end of this for an hourly rate of looking up those public records?
If it takes staff time that otherwise would be devoted to doing something beneficial to every taxpayer or a bulk of taxpayers for a small handful that want to make the request, yes.
I agree with Commissioner Tobias. So if you want to make a motion, I'll second it and see where it goes.
Yeah, I'm just having trouble with the accounting on this. It sounds like we're taxing ourselves. And in an effort to be as transparent as possible, I certainly would hope the clerk would raise his, but in a gesture of goodwill, I would ask that we forego our public records fees when it comes to sharing information with the clerk. So that would be my motion.
Oh, with the clerk. I apologize. I thought you meant in terms of with the public. No, just with the clerk?
Yes.
Okay, yes, I'll support that too.
I'll second that motion.
Commissioner Pritchett.
I'm fine with that too, but just for understanding, when there's a charge for public records requests, the county does not make money off of that. You have staff time that's involved in researching these things and getting the items together, and actually, it's still probably going in the hole some. So all Commissioner Lober did was bring it up just a little bit. It's still, there's still no income from public records. As far as doing this with the clerk, it wouldn't matter. There's still going to be costs involved either side getting public records together, and the taxpayers are going to absorb it regardless. So whether you charge it to one taxpayer and to the other, it's a wash. Wouldn't make any difference to me. I'm fine with that too, because it's just still taxpayer cost no matter what we do.
I mean, here's what I would tell you too, and Ms. Bentley, if you don't mind, Commissioner Zardi.
That's fine.
No,
Yeah, let's call the question.
just real briefly, and then I'll call the question. If I were them, I wouldn't do it as a public records request to begin with. I'd subpoena it because you have a much easier and much more serious set of ramifications that you can use as a remedy if the county doesn't produce it. So I don't know that they're going to send us a single public records request with anything on this lawsuit when they can just subpoena it and get everything anyway. But let's go ahead. We'll call the question.
All right, I want to call a question.
All in favor?
Wait, say the question one more time.
So this is to waive costs to the clerk
Okay, thank you.
for production with respect to public records pertaining to this case. All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, passes 5-0. So the next
And now I'm going to make a motion that we cancel the executive session until we decide further what we're going to do and discuss it later, I guess, if we want to go back or we decide not ultimately to have a fully open and transparent system, that's fine. I mean, again, I agree with Commissioner Tobias that this is a unique circumstance, but what happens when we have a different elected official that's not as honorable as Mr. Ellis or not as much of a good person as Mr. Ellis? Mr. Ellis, Scott fundamentally disagrees with what we've done. However, our legal says we're on solid ground. What happens if we have some partisan hack that gets elected that just constantly sues us, and we've now set precedent that we do all this in the public?
Well, I mean, let me make
Like,
it clear. This is.
I'm just saying, we need to weigh each situation carefully, and
I
so I
agree.
have no problem putting it in the public.
I'll second that.
So, okay,
Canceling the executive session for today.
so I'll call the question.
All right, let's call the question. All in favor of canceling the executive session for today, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, passes 5-0.
Can I do a follow-up?
Yeah.
Mr. Bate? I heard a rumor, from one or two people that the clerk's office was allocated $750,000 for software for their office that they desperately need. This total software cost is $1.5 million, but that they haven't spent the money this budget cycle and that they may not possibly spend it this budget cycle.
Yeah, it's my understanding that they did an RFP, and I don't believe I've heard directly from the clerk. I think I've heard from some of the clerk's staff that they were not going to be moving forward with that particular purchase at this time.
Because that probably could have been some pretty important information to find out before we raised the MSTU. I'm not saying that we...
Well, that wouldn't have been before the MSTU. That's happened as part of this fiscal year.
But
he didn't make that decision, I don't believe,
Right.
until...
But if it was a possibility, I mean, obviously, it's yeah.
Yeah,
So, I
yeah,
mean,
because
and I'd like to know what the plans are for next year. Maybe we could ask?
Let me ask a question on that same topic. Were that not allocated to the clerk's office, would we have had to have exceeded that 3% cap to raise the sheriff if we had that 750 still in play?
Well, that would have been up to the board. Well, that's general fund money, not MSTU money.
But if
And-
we offset the change?
Yeah,
But then
yeah,
we
you
could have raised the MSTU for the general fund as opposed to the sheriff's. I mean, there's a lot of ways, correct?
Well, you would have.
Yeah.
That money was in the general fund budget, and it is in the general fund budget. So the board could have allocated that to a different purpose. That purpose could have included additional dollars to the sheriff's office.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not pointing fingers. I'm sure everybody, again, I know we need the software, but it's just funny how things sort of work out, and we're here, is all.
Well, I think the board was trying to be helpful to the clerk. He had indicated during the development of last year's budget that software was, I thought, my understanding was rather important. That's why it was going out on RFP, and that's why we came back to the board and suggested that we fund that and put that $750 in the budget for this fiscal year, and then we would have followed up with the $750 for the following fiscal year.
And
So
let
if
me-
they don't spend it this year, what, Does it just get bumped to next year,
Well,
or does it get
that's gonna
added to
be,
the other?
you know, that's going to be up to the board and what the clerk's going to do. My understanding is the clerk's not running, and there'll be a new clerk. I don't know that need's going to go away. It's hard for me to predict, but I would venture to say that if our current clerk thought that this was an important enough purchase to make because he needed it, he's rather frugal, and I would venture to say that a future clerk will think it's equally important, if not more. But, that's just a, professional best guess on my part.
Thank you.
Okay, so the last item, I'd like to have someone, hopefully either Commissioner Tobias or anyone else who feels so inclined, make a motion that we, in reciprocity with the clerk's office doing the same, we waive attorney-client privilege only as to this case with respect to any litigation strategy or anything pertaining in some way to settlement. And I would suggest that be interpreted broadly. So essentially, I would contemplate that anything that any of the five of us send to or receive from Ms. Bentley or anyone else in county legal about this, that be waived if the clerk's office does the same. Commissioner Tobias?
Thank you. And I'm going to have to ask County Attorney's Office a question with your indulgence.
Sure, please.
Okay, so this is getting a little complicated for me. With Mr. Berman's intrepid reporting, it seems as though the sheriff's office may have gotten outside counsel on this.
Yes.
Explain to me how that would work. Would those strategies, notes, all that good work product then be available to everyone as well?
That's a good question. I think the portion that is in our office would be. I don't know that the attorney-client privilege between the sheriff and his counsel would be waived. Certainly not, because that's a separate issue. But once it gets into the public record with our items, there is a potential that it would be waived. And I would need clarification if you mean everything in writing, anything that's filed with the court is public anyway.
Anything that would ordinarily be covered by attorney-client privilege between any or all of the five of us in your office pertaining to this case, that's the cleanest and broadest way that I can put it. Again, with the express understanding that they reciprocate and do the same. Until they agree to do that, I wouldn't release anything that they're not already entitled to. Commissioner Pritchett?
Yeah, I'm starting to struggle a little bit. Commissioner Isnardi, I'm kind of in agreement, I'm pretty strongly in agreement with what she spoke over the situation. Here's the thing, too, guys. When I came on as commissioner, I made the duty to do the job as commissioner. Again, not that I don't like Mr. Ellis. I do. I enjoy all the stuff he does. But I don't have a duty to the clerk of court office. And this is even on a future event. I don't know how comfortable I'm getting in this now because I have a duty to protect my position of protecting taxpayer dollars right now. And again, I'm not a legal expert, so sometimes when we get alone in these meetings, it's a time that I can hear you guys speak and I can hear counsel and I start getting a better understanding. And again, I believe what we did was correct. And I'm not sure now, after what Commissioner Isnardi said, it's starting to sink into my head, and I don't know that we shouldn't maybe have a separate meeting because there is so many other entities involved in this now also. It's a pretty important subject.
Well, I'll jump in as well. As far as the sheriff's office, the sheriff and his counsel are going to do whatever it is they're going to do. We don't have control one way or the other. Whether we choose to coordinate with them to some degree or a great degree, certainly that's up in play. But we can't, nor would I suggest that we even broach the subject with the sheriff's office of waiving privilege. That's up to him. I would probably advise that he not, because really this is a kind of an odd maneuver that I think, quite frankly, is something I've never seen before. But again, it goes back to the risk versus the reward. I think the reward is that the public knows that there's nothing that's being done in the shadows, there's no real secret, and that we're being open and transparent about everything. Obviously, with the limitations of sunshine, I don't know what my four colleagues up here have said to county legal, but I know what I've said, and I know what I've received from county legal, and I know, based upon conversations I've had with county legal, what the general strategy would be with each of the four options that I discussed. I don't see, as I mentioned, any glaring weaknesses. I don't know if the clerk has any glaring weaknesses. They may. I don't know whether there are emails from council to the clerk saying, this is an uphill battle, we're never going to win, you know, they're going to find X, Y, and Z, which would be great for us to know because we could potentially use something like that in a motion to dismiss to get rid of this quickly and save taxpayers a tremendous amount of money. I don't know that opening it up would really do much apart from generating additional public records requests, which we might otherwise not have, apart from apart from speeding it up. I think this may speed it up quite a bit, again, with the exception of public records requests, which might take a long time to fulfill depending on how extravagant they may be. Yes, please.
Okay, do we have to decide on this today? Because I would like, at the end of this, the right legal thing needs to happen. And I believe no matter what route we go through, and if we do the other route, the courts have a way of coming back with the right legal opinion. So, I trust this commission up here. They have good heart. So I know as we're doing this, we're all going for the right legal outcome at the end of it. So if we could have a time to make this decision as far as we're going to continue in the shade, we called it Shade of the City, the executive meeting, or in the public, I would like a meeting to think about that, because I do want to make the best decision for our constituents,
When's our
if
next
that would be
meeting?
okay.
Mr. Bate?
Excuse me?
When's our next meeting?
Next board meeting?
Yeah, whether it's P and Z or regular. The 6th?
It would be the 6th. It's a zoning meeting on February 6th, and then the next regular board meeting is an evening meeting on February 11th.
And Ms. Bentley, do we have any deadlines that are coming up that would be problematic for you with? In terms of, will we have a deadline preceding the 6th or immediately following the 6th that this might influence in some way?
Okay, so I think you've got three things on the table here. You've got the executive session,
Which has been scrapped.
which has been scrapped, but if you change your mind and want to have one, we'll need to re-advertise. So if that's the question for the 6th, you can bring it forward, and then we can come at the next meeting if you direct us to do that. We do need to respond to the complaint. If your direction is to proceed with all applicable legal arguments, we know what to do. But if that's where you're going, that's a different question. And if you want to waive attorney-client privilege, that's yet a third question.
Let's go for the second, just to kind of piecemeal this a little bit and move us forward. So as far as directing you to pursue any and all meritorious or potentially meritorious defenses, including, if applicable, motions to dismiss, let's go ahead and get a motion for that if we could, unless there's discussion on that point. So basically tell the attorney's office to fight tooth and nail. And don't give up on anything. That's the simplest way to put that. So anything that we can use to defend against this, we do, as long as it's not frivolous. All right, so may I have a motion for that? All right, Commissioner Pritchett made the motion. I'll second it. Commissioner Tabaya?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question for County Attorney's Office. If we were to go down that route, as far as staff time, the time of the attorneys that are on the other side, that being Mr. Ellis's attorneys, and now the sheriff's attorneys. Can you ballpark what that would potentially cost taxpayers? Because they're on all sides of this. So if we were going to go down that route, I'd like to have some sort of estimate of what that cost would be. And I know I'm not looking for anything specific, but in your best guess.
Well, we're in-house, so I haven't estimated how much it would cost, because we're in-house and we're going to do it no matter what, right?
But if you can give me some sort of hours, we did that with the public safety, that we got a cost for the staff time on that, and I do value your guys' time.
Ms. Bentley, can I just jump in, because I may be able to help out as well? I think that what the clerk is paying their outside counsel, again, they have inside counsel, their outside counsel I think is $320 an hour at the highest rate, $200 an hour for associates, and then I think paralegals are $100 an hour.
Right, and they've estimated about $60,000 to $80,000 to try this case.
Okay.
So that's what, 6 weeks?
Okay, so 60 to 80 on the clerks.
On the clerk.
I'm not familiar with the follow-up, Mr. Chair.
Please.
I'm not familiar. I mean, how would I ballpark? I have absolutely no idea. How would I ballpark the sheriff?
I think about the same. Should be about the same. They're intervening. They may have a few more steps. They may go, it's very hard. Maybe less, because we will be able to do the heavy lifting on that in-house, the county attorney's office. So they may not use as much time, but they may have different arguments. I haven't talked to them about that yet. So it could be the same.
And
as
how
the
many
clerk.
hours are you expecting?
It'll be several hundred hours, I expect.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I know you don't, your office doesn't get a fraction of, yeah. What for a public records request, we bill out now staff plus benefits. Do you have any idea what that, I'm just trying to get a total number here.
I have to apologize. I don't know that number
We
off the
haven't
top
got
of
a
my
public
head.
record yet?
We have not done those numbers yet.
Would $75 an hour,
That would not surprise me.
and you said ballpark again, a couple hundred hours?
Yes.
And that's again, if it doesn't survive, or I guess if it survives a motion to dismiss, because if it fails at a motion to dismiss and it's kicked out, you're not going to have 600 hours into it. Am I right?
Correct. If it's cut off quickly, that's one thing. If we go to a summary judgment, that's another thing. If it goes all the way to trial, it's even more time. So it just depends. It could be much shorter, could be longer. Appeals take even more time.
So, okay, so you said 60 to 80 on two sides. If I split that down the middle, that 70 and 70 is 140. $75 an hour times 200 hours is $15,000. So I'm conservatively, this decision will cost taxpayers, no matter the outcome, $150,000. Is that a fair estimate?
The lawsuit does trigger that expenditure of funds, yes.
And it could go, it certainly could go either way.
Yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Isnardi?
I think I hear circus music in the background, but I mean, let's not forget, no matter what decision we make up here, whether it's unorthodox or whatever, the clerk sued us. I mean, we didn't ask for this lawsuit. We made decisions based on the best legal advice that we had, whether you like those decisions or not. Choosing to sue us over that decision was the clerk's decision to do. So as far as costs go, as far as us defending ourselves or defending our positions, defending our own legal staff that says we were within our legal right to raise the MSTU, we have to consider that. We didn't ask for this. It's not like, we signed up and said, oh, please sue us. We're going to violate the law knowingly. And, oh, by the way, we don't mind paying it. So, yeah, it's costing taxpayers, but not by any fault of our own.
Commissioner Pritchett?
And I want to piggyback off that. And Commissioner Isnard, you said that last time we had this meeting, and that kind of hit me too. The supermajority of the commissioners believed that we did the appropriate vote when we did it. We have legal, and we all have the same interpretation that the county is in a correct position. Now, as far as the clerk suing, he's got the right to sue. God bless America. That's part of the process. And if he has that belief and it's in his position to do it, you know what? And taxpayers are paying for it, it's what makes our Constitution strong. So that's okay. It's okay. And most of it's going to be staff time, but it's a good process to make sure we come out in a right and correct position as far as the taxpayer. So I don't even have a lot of heartburn over that. It's okay. And by the end of this, when we get through with the courts, we'll know what the legal position is, and that's good. And that's good for our taxpayers. So, it's okay.
And I would tend to agree. I mean, this is something that potentially has ramifications in perpetuity. This could last, well, it's likely to last forever unless the law is changed. We are one county in the state of Florida out of 67 that has a 3% cap. No other county has that, so there really isn't going to be a huge amount of case law, if any, on this subject. So it's something where it's going to have to get sorted out sooner or later. At some point in time, the fight's going to have to be had, whether it's with this clerk in this commission or another clerk in another commission. It's a legitimate question. I do know that, Commissioner Tabaya and Ms. Bentley rightfully said it could go either way. yeah, anything can go either way. If you buy a scratch-off ticket for lottery, you could win it. That could go either way, and that's a factually accurate statement. But I think our chance of prevailing on this is substantially higher than the clerk's chance of prevailing. You know, I don't like necessarily ascribing numbers to things like this because you can never tell what you don't know. But I think that our arguments are the more solid arguments. And I think if someone wanted to ask Ms. Bentley, you know, which way she thinks this is going to go, you know, whether it's a greater likelihood we would prevail or Mr. Ellis would prevail, that's a different question than could this go either way. Of course it could go either way. You know, we could get struck by lightning as soon as we walk out of the building. That's a possibility. It's not a likely possibility, but it's something that could happen. Commissioner Tobias.
Thank you. I think the old statement is, what, past performance is a good predictor of future events. And I just think back to the last time, and again, our county attorney was different at that time, but the last time we tangled with the clerk of the court, I think we ended up on the short end of the stick. And I know I'd spoken with the county attorney's office. Again, we had a different county attorney at the time, but he was fairly certain, I think were the words he used, that we would end up on the right side of this. And you're right, buying a scratch-off ticket could go either way, but in this situation, we don't have to buy a scratch-off. There are other options out there, a charter amendment process where we could put it out to the citizens and see what their intent was, and forego the $60,000 to $80,000 on the sheriff's, $60,000 to $80,000 that Mr. Ellis would be spending, and the $15,000 that we would be spending. So this isn't a binary decision. This is one that we could leave to the voters, or we can accept the clerk's position on this one. And I don't know that there would be $150,000 in legal fees accepting the clerk's position on this one. So it's not $150,000 is our only option. There are certainly other avenues to pursue as we move forward.
And just to jump on that, as far as past performance being indicative of how things go in the future, yeah, that may be with certain things. We're not talking about a stock or a bond, though. You know, we're talking about a fluid set of circumstances where each case is totally unique. I can tell you that our county attorney's office has had cases that we've won, and we've had cases that we've lost. I, as an attorney, have had cases I've won, and I've had cases that I've lost. It really depends. I can tell you I wasn't on the commission either. We had a different county attorney at the time. We have a more, and I don't mean this good, bad, or indifferent, just an observation, we have a more risk-averse county attorney now than we did in the past. So when she says something's more or less likely, I would take it into account with that in mind. I agreed with Scott Ellis when he sued the county last time in terms of the solidity of his position. No one will ever say that I said otherwise, because I never did. I don't agree with him on this. I think that he has it right sometimes and he has it wrong other times. The question isn't whether he's well-intentioned, it's whether he's right and whether we're right and what do we do. The problem if we settle this is the next time we have to do something that involves exceeding that cap, we're going to have the same situation again. And this is going to be something that's going to haunt the county for perpetuity, indefinitely, until it's resolved. I think we can get rid of it, sure, easily this way, but truth be told, Commissioner Tobias, I don't think you're going to get even a second on a motion either to just stipulate to what he wants or to really settle it out unless there's a very creative settlement that's proposed, and I don't think there's going to be one that you're going to get a second on, quite frankly. And I don't mean to say that pejoratively or to denigrate you in any way. I just don't think that's the will of the commission.
And I mean this fairly, I don't expect one. The intent of this was to hold taxes at a minimum. And do I expect one from this commission? Absolutely not.
All right, I'm going to go ahead, since we're getting a little circular here. We're going to call the question as to whether or not to direct county legal to pursue each and every meritorious or potentially meritorious non-frivolous defense in defending against the lawsuit. So all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nay. All right, passes 4-1 with Commissioner Tobias in the negative. And the last item, and I apologize, Ms. Bentley, I want a little more clarification in terms of your response deadline, because my concern is potentially something that we may get as a result of opening up confidentiality and having that reciprocated. we could potentially incorporate in response to the complaint. And I don't know if you would have enough time. If you would have enough time, if we address this on the 6th, I'm happy to kick it to that point. But if you wouldn't, I'd rather address it now and see which way it goes. Yeah, and that's the other thing. I mean, if folks, obviously, Commissioner Tobias, I think you would probably be supportive of that motion. In fact, I'd ask you probably to make it. Commissioner Isnardi, would you be supportive of that motion as well? Because if I have my 3 votes on this, or 4 votes, then we can get it taken care of today.
Restate it.
Sure.
Sorry.
Sure. So the crux of it, and I'll just make it broad so that no one's playing games and there's not a question as to who's hiding what or misclassifying what. I would propose that if and when the clerk agrees to do the same, we will waive attorney-client privilege insofar as any written communications between any and all of the 5 of us and county legal are concerned with respect to this specific lawsuit. And really what I see that entailing is settlement questions, litigation strategy, things of that nature. But I'll phrase it as broadly as I did, so I'm not going to reference settlement or litigation strategy. Simply anything that any of the 5 of us write to county legal or have written to us by county legal, any communications we have, be it a text message, be it a written document that's printed out and handed over, be it an email, anything in writing that we give them, anything that's tangible that they can produce, crayon on a napkin, we produce that if and when the clerk's office does the same. Time period? I think he'll turn it around. I think he'll turn it around pretty quickly. I trust Scott. I just want to be clear about what we're doing. I don't think he's going to play games with, saying, okay, well, you give it to me now, and I'll give it to you in 6 months when it's resolved.
I think we need a whole meeting just on this, because this is getting a little ridiculous. Okay, I'm in support of that.
All right. It sounds like I've got at least 3. So, Mr. Tobias, Commissioner Tobias, if you go ahead and make the motion. So moved.
No, is this including work product?
Not their internal work product. It's just anything that we discuss with them. If they have notes internally, I don't expect the clerk to produce theirs, and I don't think we should be producing ours. Just attorney-client. So we're each a 5th of the client, and the body represents the client. Anything with any of the 5 of us and the county attorney's office on this particular suit, that's it.
I think it may be amended in the future, but it's a good first step.
Start.
So again, that motion was
Is that a motion?
That motion was too diverse and long-winded for me. So I'll vote for it, but please, I'm not prepared
Commissioner
to.
Snarty, would you mind?
So moved.
All right, perfect. I'll go ahead and second it in that
There we
case.
go.
Are you all who are in the fun position of working for the clerk of courts? You guys are good? All right, we've hashed that out 10 times. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes 5-0. All right, thank you all so much. Last item I have, because we're still technically in board reports.
Oh, my gosh.
This one's quick. Ancient Order of Hibernians? Is that how you pronounce that? All right, as commission chair, they asked me to put a resolution on. I wanted to see if someone had any special interest in putting it on, because I don't mind having it on there, but I just didn't know if someone felt particularly...
I'm Irish descent.
Would you like to do it?
I've done it like 5 years.
All right, I'm going to pass this over to you then. All right, this is just a letter from them asking to have the item put on.
I can't support that unless Commissioner Smith wears the hat that he wears. Will you be?
It's done.
Thank you.
We'll bring in a 4-leaf
Just
clover.
make
Is
sure,
that okay?
make sure whoever comes to accept it doesn't have a criminal record.
All right, with that said, 11:48, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn it. It's adjourned.
Thanks.
The opinions expressed by any member of the public during any period of public comment do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, or the program sponsor, and are solely those of the presenter. The Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, and the program sponsor hereby expressly disclaim any and all responsibility or liability for any defamatory or slanderous statements expressed by any member of the public during any such period.